Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the reconvening of this adjourned Resources Scrutiny Commission budget meeting. The items we're scheduled to be dealing with this afternoon are relating to the People Directorate, where we're looking at adult social care, children and particularly the Direct Schools Grant, Resources Directorate and Savings. Before I go to those, can I just touch on a couple of things? In particular, we circulated notes of the last meeting. Now, this isn't to formally approve them, but can I just check whether members had any points or comments on those notes? Because I think they're possibly the most effective way of sharing with full council the things we've discussed. And therefore, I'd like to know that as far as they go for the first half of the meeting, members are happy with them. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, before we get on to today's business, Denise, there were a couple of questions I just wanted to run past you, if I may. And the first one I mentioned to you in an email yesterday about whether the Heat Network's business plan change or withdrawal may have any impact on the council's capital programme.
Thank you. So in terms of the actual business plan, obviously the details were outlined in terms of why it was necessary to withdraw the business plan from OSM, and ideally we need to ensure that the business plan aligns with the details and the propositions that's going to come through in relation to City Leap. The council's capital programme has a programme area aligned to the Heat Networks, and we're not anticipating that that will change. Assets haven't transferred as yet, so they're still within the council's capital programme. Okay, thank you. Can I ask a further question? In the press releases that came out in the week regarding Gorham Homes and Homes at Hengrove, is that reflected in the capital programme funding for Gorham Homes that we looked at last week? So the programme as it currently stands will reflect our current arrangements and current pipeline, and the pipeline activity that will encompass the business plan activity for 2022-23. The capital programme itself will also have the details in terms of the Hengrove programme. So obviously when we get the business plan, we don't anticipate that will change the programme that we looked at or the budget notes that we looked at for long-term investments. It should still all be contained in exactly the same envelope that we've set out.
Okay, thank you. And the third question, which is just procedural as far as the budget process is concerned, we have a budget meeting set for the 15th of February and we have a reserve budget meeting set for the 2nd of March. What is the last date on which the council has to approve a budget in order for the council tax demands to go out on time?
In law, it's the 11th of March, but there actually needs to be a certain amount of time between the budget being approved and being able to actually issue the council tax notifications. The council tax notifications need to have been sent, actually posted by the 11th of March, but there's obviously some work that the council needs to do in getting ready for that date and deadline. So the 2nd of March is really for ourselves very, very tight and more or less the final date. There wouldn't be much leverage a day or two. As soon as we start to go beyond that, we start to then have a reduction in the level of council tax that we can legally collect.
Yeah, okay, thank you for clarifying that. So we now move to the People Directorate, and the suggestion is that we deal with adult care first, and can I just check with cabinet members and officers that that is appropriate? Well, I'm happy to do it in whatever order that works for... But yeah, no, please do. No, I fully understand that. But if we take people first, and then we move on to children. Christine, what time have you got to go? Okay, we'll try and balance that as best we can. I was just having a discussion with Helen at the start of the meeting and comparing notes on past years of budgets, and I suspect neither of us can remember when adult care hasn't been under financial pressure at council budget time, but certainly noting that there are very different situations now because the department has got a real sign of having a grasp of the challenges and pressures that it's working under. And I think there is a difference amongst members in that we now recognise that we have a role in constructively playing a part in helping this process and not actually aiming to ask difficult and confrontational questions. So I set that scene, Helen, in that I hope that's the tone that we'll be reflecting, and that it's really simply that we want to make sure we've got an understanding of the issues that impact directly on the budget that is affecting you and your team. So what we're going to do really is just let members follow up on the questions that you've already given written answers to and ask the things that are concerning them. And we'll sort of let it take its course. So who would like to go first? Martin? Martin? Do you want? Are you Martin? Do you want to go? John?
I'll ask a question.
All right, John, you go first then.
This is not confrontational, Helen. Now, previous budgets, honestly, it's really just get the conversation going because we do need to have a debate and discussion. You've probably sensed we're all very supportive, and we know it's a demand-led service, so often we're going to get cost overruns, and we do get them regularly, and we've got one at the moment. We've asked, I think one of the questions that was asked by the Scrutiny Commission is, are you confident that next year's budgets are going to work? And to the best of your ability, obviously you've said yes. There are there are some major changes. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the changes? The one I picked up was that we're going to strive to try and look after people in their own home more, which is what they want, of course, and might also be a lot cost effective for us. So just feel free to elaborate, really.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks also, Jeff, for your comments. And we do acknowledge that we've had, over the last couple of years, particularly cross-party support to most of the transformation programme that we've been putting in place. But people have been sceptical sometimes because some of the transformation and what we've said will come from that hasn't then materialised. And obviously, over the last 22 months, the big unseen issue has been COVID, and responding to the pandemic has caused huge additional pressures in our department as it has across the council, but probably particularly in ours. I think your question about supporting more people to stay independent at home, that pre-pandemic, that was what we were trying to do, and we were trying to shift that balance within our policies in any case. So it was things like bringing in the then Bristol rate to, how shall I put it, to get some of our care providers thinking about whether or not this was the business that they wanted to be in, quite honestly. And I think that there had been a bit of a view that some of those providers had kind of got us over a barrel. And because, as you say, that most people want to stay independent in their own home for longer, it was thinking about what pieces need to be in place in order to be able to do that. Now, the pandemic changed that in several ways. One of which being that, for good or ill, the perception of care homes not being a safe place in the first lockdown meant that a lot of families and carers we're thinking we don't want mum or auntie or grandma to be in that environment. So I think that's kind of exacerbated. And now one of the things that's exacerbating it as well is simply workforce shortages, which have put so much pressure that I don't know if anybody's been in this situation, but on discharge from hospital, the hospital is really kind of asking family, neighbours, friends, can you support this person if they come back home? We've also seen, haven't we, the huge and fantastic response from community and voluntary sector care in the loosest possible term organisations, so that everything from going shopping, picking up prescriptions, taking the dog for a walk, all of those things that happened in the first lockdown. We've been working very hard with communities in order to establish that, because it's one thing saying people should live independently at home, and it's another putting in the wherewithal for them to do that. So some of the things that you will have seen, that one of the lines of the budget is around the community meals service, for example, which we believe could pay its own way. At the moment, we have to sub it a little bit, but it's well worth that money to be able to do that. If more people use that meals service, which is the well-being check as well as delivering the lunch for somebody every day, then that would help in keeping people independent. Boosting the efforts of the voluntary sector, and we're doing that in conjunction with our partners in health through the ICS, the changes that's happening in the NHS, and through the localities. So we're working very closely with some of those community hubs around making sure that happens. And increasingly, I know this from my own ward, that things like the knitting group that meets in the library have started meeting again, the choirs, the walking groups, all of those things are the things that keep people independent for longer. So it's making sure that, first of all, I'm passionate about not assuming that voluntary means you get it for nothing. Those voluntary sector organisations need support to be able to do what they're doing. But by all kind of facing in the same direction, hopefully that will mean that it's a reality for more people, and more people can stay independent longer. And that might mean just putting off a date when they've got to go into residential care. But for every year that happens, it's better for us, looking at the bottom line, but it's also better for them.
Tim?
Thanks. Helen, hi. You don't have to answer this necessarily, there are probably other people. But I know you mentioned there about the meal service. I know you're particularly passionate about that. We're looking at saving 100,000 in the budget on that. Can you explain what the vision is that will improve that service and at the same time save us money?
I can't remember. I think all members had the opportunity to hear a presentation from James Dagnall, who's the manager there, at one of our all-member briefings. And anybody who's met him knows that he is completely driven about making this service, as I said to John, really pay for itself, and we believe that it could. In fact, I believe that it's such a good model that other local authorities, some of whom have outsourced that to the Wiltshire Farm Foods and those kind of people, that they might look to Bristol to help support them in supporting their own residents. So I believe that with more take up, and that includes people who are self-funders, obviously, that it can wash its own face, as they say. And there's so many other benefits that we can have from that service, because it isn't somebody just coming round with a fortnight's worth of frozen meals. It's somebody coming every day, asking if you're okay. If you meet the drivers and hear their stories about things that they've done when, sadly sometimes they go and call on somebody and they may have had a fall, may still be in bed and not feeling well, that they don't just deliver the meal, they do all of that support, and there's a value to that. I don't necessarily mean a financial value, but clearly it's one that's appreciated by the families and neighbours of those people. So I think that we ought to make much more of the fact that we've got that kind of gold standard service within the council's own, and of course we've now got our electric vans as well. So the whole fleet hasn't been replaced by electric yet, but we've got four electric vans now in the fleet, and great enthusiasm actually amongst the drivers to be part of, doing their bit really.
So,
Mike?
Sorry,
Oh,
I was just going to follow. So, although we have it down as a saving in the budget, what we're really envisaging is growing the service so that we get more cost effective, and that way we'll save us money. Yeah.
Mike?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a general observation about the adult social care budget overall, and obviously, like Councillor Holland and the team, the support of members in understanding the pressures on the service is very welcome. But in a sense, that's one of the reasons why we do need to continue to look for savings, because at the same time as the service is having to cope with unprecedented demand on the back of COVID, the fact is that our services benchmark as relatively high cost against comparator authorities. And one of the reasons why the council has a budget gap is because we have funded the growth pressures in adult social care. So it's really important that, as Helen has described, where we can make efficiency savings and change the model of care, we need to do that in order to make sure that we've got the resources to put into the people who most need it. So I just wanted to kind of recognise that we're balancing two things here. Yes, there is unprecedented pressure, and it's right that we're supporting the most vulnerable in the city. And one of the ways that we can do that is to continue to look for efficiencies and transforming the service, because we are relatively high cost, and we need to acknowledge that, Chair. Thanks.
But I think, though, taking that, and I know, Helen, you and I have discussed this, of areas such as my ward where it's not necessarily people looking for free provision, but there are many residents who would benefit from a daily service rather than, as you say, a fortnightly service. And there has to be a mechanism where that can almost be a commercial operation for those who need it, because there isn't actually an appropriate commercial operation that provides them with the care and support that they and their families would want. So I think there is a way of achieving both those aspects. If I can just come in there with one question, is looking at the budget monitor and seeing the pressures which are substantially identified is being increased as a result of COVID. But at the end of the day, in next financial year, it isn't going to matter which source causes the extra pressure. We're going to have to fund it. And between you and your team, do you feel you've identified where those pressures are going to come from? And I'm saying that's not a trick question, because normally year on year you can simply plot a trend from what's gone in the previous 2 or 3 years, but we're now in a situation where there presumably has to be a significant amount of estimation, because you don't know how those trends are going to manifest themselves.
I'll let Hugh take that, but one of the things that I think is definitely going to hit us is those workforce pressures, because with those shortages across health and care organisations, there's only one thing which is going to attract more people into those jobs, isn't it? Which is going to be, which they deserve for what they're doing, but is going to be improved pay for those people. So that is going to end up coming back as a call on us and on the NHS. So I think that for me is probably the one that I worry about most.
Thank you. I think probably the first point to make is that in keeping with the previous point around more people living at home, we have actually seen quite significant shifts. Is this feeding back? I can hear it echoing. Is it all right? All right, it's okay. It's just me then. Yeah, we've seen quite significant shifts in the pattern of care delivery over the last few years. People will recall the Better Lives at Home programme, but we've seen, as a product of that, quite a significant shift amongst older people towards more domiciliary style services and fewer people being placed in institutional care. And so that's what the intention of that was, and that's good news because that's more people being supported in their domicile, in the place of their choice. What we've seen during COVID is quite a significant uptick in the demand from and the cost of provision for younger adults. And so what we've seen, especially in the context of mental ill health, we've seen possibly a 20% increase in the presentation of people with quite high-level mental health needs during the COVID period. And that has resulted in a cost pressure for us of something along the lines of about £4 million a year. On top of that, we've also seen how younger adults with significant issues around learning disability and autism in the period of lockdown and beyond, their circumstances have changed whereby they couldn't use day services quite as readily and perhaps have had to have more qualitative one-to-one support in their care settings or in their accommodation settings. And that's resulted in quite a significant increase in unit costs for those people as well. And then the third point is that the number of older people balanced against the number of younger adults has moved from about a 60-40 split to about a 50-50 split. So we're now serving about the same number of younger adults as we are older people, and younger adults typically cost quite significantly more because the nature of the needs tend to be less episodic, more enduring, and higher cost. So we don't envisage, some of that's due to COVID and some of that's due to the work that we did before in order to reduce the demand from the older people sector. But what that does mean is that's not going to be a quick fix. COVID finishes and everything's back to normal. I think there's going to be a long tail for that level of demand. What we then need to do is ensure that we have the best provision that we can source here in Bristol and North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, but as Bristol especially, we need to get more services, especially those for people with high levels of need in our locality, because at the moment there's a shortfall and we're having to send people to services in other parts of the country, and that typically costs a lot more and is a lot more difficult to monitor and a lot more difficult to review. So the demand, I fear, is going to remain for a period of time, but there's a lot we can do in the short term, medium and long term to mitigate that demand. And we have some of the plans you see in here and some of the things that you'll see in our transformation programme are for that purpose.
Thank you. Yeah, David. Oh, and then Zoe.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about Adult Social Care Saving 2, increasing the return of unused direct payments of £500,000. I'd like to know what the size of the current contingency fund is and how many applications does it receive a year, and why aren't we promoting its availability more as opposed to cutting it? Please.
We're not cutting it at all, and we do promote with our partner. So Westall is the partner that we work with on promoting direct payments, and we want more people to be on direct payments. But equally, I'm going to look to Hugh for the detail of the numbers that you've asked for, because I haven't got that to hand. But equally, we don't want people to be on direct payments and not maximising the use of that money for what it's supposed to be used for. So I think other authorities have got better experience than we have of kind of monitoring how that spend is and not letting it sit in the bank accounts of the recipients of direct payments. And I was asked a question about this at the Labour group last night, so you know, I've got some of this at my fingertips. So that doesn't mean that if people are, for example, I think the example that was given was saving it up to make sure that you've got enough money for over the school holidays, for example, with a young person, to give them the support that they need. So that isn't going to suddenly disappear out of your account. It's over a period of a year where people are looking at and making sure that it's appropriate use and clawing back that money that isn't being used.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say I don't know the exact numbers for the questions you asked, but I've written them down, and I'll respond to you in more detail. One thing I will say, though, is it's typical of direct payments that contingencies do build, and people's direct payment arrangements allow a proportion of contingency to be kept at any time in their bank account. So that's just normal with direct payments. And what also happens normally with direct payments is that people's contingencies build up, and then you have to undergo a process of review, which is a good part of any care provision arrangement anyway, and then negotiate a return of the contingency payment that's in excess of the normal proportion that you'd expect. I have to say that that this is a review process, and at any given time there will always be money that can be reviewed back from direct payment contingencies, but it wouldn't ever be against anybody's will, and would always be in consultation. So there'd always be a conversation with the person, and the decision would be made as a product of that. But I can say in local authorities that I've worked in, there's always this issue that contingencies do tend to build up in people's bank accounts, and it is perfectly reasonable to reclaim them after that certain set level. The other thing, though, as Helen said, is that we do try and use direct payments as much as possible, because it's really good for people sorting out their own independent solutions and becoming more kind of like, the whole thing becoming more person-centred for them. And we have seen a drop-off in the pandemic period. A lot of that's to do with people, who were working as personal assistants, and the kinds of services that people have been buying becoming less available due to lockdown and isolation and things. But we're redoubling the efforts now to try and really push direct payments again, because it is a really good way of people retaining their independence.
Okay. Zoe.
Hiya. I'll take this off. Yeah, so I've got two questions. One on ASC 12 on Concord Lodge, and one on ASC 6 on the rehab service. But maybe I'll start off on 12 for the Concord Lodge. Are you able to talk us through what's being proposed there, what the current costs are, the savings, why we think we'll make savings by closing somewhere and sending the current residents elsewhere? Or have I got that wrong? Thanks.
The proposal isn't to close it. It's the proposal is to find somebody else to run that service for us, because it is a very expensive service, and so that would include, my guess is anyway, unless the provider that comes forward, or providers that come forward, say that they don't want the actual building, which I'd be surprised about, because it's a purpose-built.
Can I just query then, because the Equalities Impact Assessment says the proposal would be to close Concord Lodge and transfer the service to an external strategic partner. So is that wrong then?
Yeah. Sorry, that isn't right.
Oh, yeah. So the intention is to keep it going in that current location with a different provider, but that would be presumably require the provider to say, yeah, they're happy to keep that going in that building with that service. So it's not necessarily, but the intention isn't to close it down as such then.
And remember that the residents there, it's a short-term facility, so it isn't people's permanent home. Although sometimes we have had people there who've been in residence quite a time, but it is one of those services. We had an organisation called Mutual Ventures came and looked at our in-house services, and that was one where they felt that we weren't making the best use of that facility, and that it was expensive.
Right. And what's the timescale for these sort of changes? Presumably you go out to consultation and then you go out to procurement on that, and that's going to take like minimum 2 years, isn't it?
Yeah, so we can't start that process obviously until the budget has gone through. And I don't know, Hugh, have you got a feeling for how long the procurement would take?
I think, what we're intending to do at the moment, we're pulling together a specification for a route to market to secure what may end up being something along the lines of a strategic partnership or some strategic arrangements with a or some providers to come to Bristol and establish much more stable and permanent long-term support for people with very high-level needs, because at the moment there's a shortfall not only in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, but there's a shortfall in the region. And what we need to do is we need to attract good providers. There are a few in the country that we know of already, and there's some here as well who are perfectly capable of developing these kinds of services, but we need to attract those providers and establish a relationship that gives them the guarantee of support and partnership in order that they can develop the kind of services at the level that we need. And this is work that we're already in conversation with the CCG, soon to become Integrated Care System, partners with, and the other local authorities in BNSSG, because we've all got the same problem and we all need to develop a much more robust set of services. And if we do it in partnership, then we'll be able to drive much better prices, and we'll also be in control of the capacity. So we won't lose our capacity to other areas of the country who haven't got any themselves. We can then hopefully bring Bristol people back to Bristol who have been living out of area in placements.
And I just wanted to follow up as well, because it's, like you say, it's a short-term assessment unit. What happens beyond that? Are people found homes in the community? But you say, with complex needs as well. So,
and what we look for, and what we can't get with the level of certainty when we place out of area, what we look for is that progression within the service, because excellent services for people with high level needs have built in this expectation that they will step down from very high level support and get lower levels of support, and then often in the end people can move into their own accommodation and with support. And there are other pieces of work that we have underway in regard to housing, in partnership with the housing, with Stephen Peacock's Directorate, which you will have heard of, I've no doubt, in the last meeting, that we are looking to develop accommodation for people locally as well, in order that we can really build a firm foundation for people in this area who come from this area who have high level needs.
Jeff, can I just add, if it's okay, Zoe, at the last cabinet meeting we took a report about a partnership across the region for and that's for learning disabilities and autism. So I think that what I hope for through that work is we get some more standard pricing across the region, and the report actually shows the proportion of people who go out to South Gloucestershire and North Somerset, so in our CCG area, but also beyond into the region, and comparatively there's fewer people that go outside the southwest region to appropriate support. So by that kind of transparency and open book approach, the providers won't be able to play the authorities off against one another, and we'll spend less time kind of going up to Derbyshire to look at what's happening to one of our people and them coming down to Somerset to look at what's happening to theirs, because people will be looked after closer to home. Which I think I said this at the Labour group last night, has to be the ambition, because if you want to reintegrate people into Bristol, it's if you've lived in a farmhouse on Dartmoor for your teenage years, it's going to be much harder for you to integrate back into the city life.
Yeah, thank you. Is it right if I go on to the next question? Yeah. So that's on the review of the rehabilitation service. And that, because that also seems to be about closing the South Bristol Centre, but keeping the East Bristol one on, but changing provider? Or could you talk us through about what those changes are and why we believe we can make savings?
So, again, we talked about this quite a lot at the last Cabinet meeting when the report to, in principle, to start the South Bristol work was taken, but I amended the report's recommendation to that it has to come back to Cabinet before that decision is formalised, because there's a lot of interest in that particular issue. So I'm going to give you a lot of detail, but I think it's really important in the case of this one. So Sirona and the CCG first came to us last year to ask us if we could second staff from South Bristol Rehab into the rehabilitation unit, 60 beds at South Bristol Community Hospital, because they couldn't staff all of those beds because of the workforce shortages, and we hadn't got South Bristol Rehab working at capacity because it's outdated facilities. So the needs of people who leave hospital are greater now, so people might need what we think of as probably a hospital bed, but the rooms aren't big enough to accommodate a hospital bed in the centre. If you leave hospital on a stretcher, for example, because it's all on the second and third floor, you've perhaps been there because it's in your ward, the lifts aren't big enough to accommodate a stretcher, so automatically some people can't be discharged into South Bristol Rehab because of those constraints. The other thing that is worth saying is that there's no statutory responsibility on local authorities to provide rehab services, and there's very, very few local authorities that now do that. We haven't been able to find a comparator in the core cities or the major cities that still do. So because we wanted to protect the terms and conditions of our workforce there, and it was great that the Sirona recognised the rehab and care skills of our staff and wanted them. We couldn't second them on a short-term basis, so that discussion started about how we could TUPE the staff into Sirona so that can be fully open all the time, and the 60 beds used in South Bristol Rehab, and it would preserve people's terms and conditions, and so that's what we're working on now. But because it's been a bit of a kind of chicken and egg situation, I have to say, because a lot of the questions that the staff and their trade union reps had about the details of what that would be like when they went over, we couldn't answer until we'd made the in-principle decision to start the consultation, the formal consultation with the trade unions and the staff. And so because that in-principle decision was made fortnight ago in here, that those talks have now started, and the trade unions are very much involved in that. And the other part of the amendment that I made to the recommendation was that I would have an informal weekly report about how those consultations were going. And in fact, earlier this week, Hugh and Stephen and I met yesterday with Sirona's chair and chief executive to talk about that, and they're very committed to working that through properly as well, because obviously they still, if it all works out, want the skills of our staff. So I hope that kind of, explains it a bit more. Sorry, it's a long explanation, but it's so much more than just closing it. And front and centre, this is what I said at the Cabinet meeting, front and centre of my mind in working through this over the last couple of months has been, first of all, the service that people get when they're discharged from hospital, and that has to be our predominant consideration. But just behind that is me wanting to treat our staff fairly and to make sure that they, that they, wherever possible, have their terms and conditions retained.
Is it all right to follow up? Yeah. Okay. So just wondering two things, sort of what will happen in the future to people who would currently go to South Bristol Rehab Centre, and also why doesn't the CCG pay for it if that's the norm in other areas? And is that something that we've explored with them, that they should be taking on this budget and they should be doing that? Because if it shouldn't be in our budget, it should be in their budget, presumably.
So what will happen is that people will go to more appropriate rehab in South Bristol, because they'll be able to use all the capacity that they've got there, which they couldn't at the moment, without using agency staff.
That's South Bristol Community Hospital.
Yeah. So so that's an easy one. It'll be better, more appropriate services. And so at the moment, as I say, there are quite a few people who on discharge from hospital can't go to South Bristol Rehab anyway. And so we haven't been at capacity, and nor has the community hospital rehab. Sorry, what was the second part? Just remind me.
Why doesn't the CCG pay for it if that's the norm in other areas?
Right, well, it does
encourage them to do that.
Yeah. No, it does pay for part of it. But Hugh, is it the first 28 days or something, is it?
Yeah, there's a few different mechanisms, and if you want to have a separate session on the vagaries of NHS funding, quite happy to do that. Yes, there is contribution from the NHS as part of the discharge to assess system, as it's known, the step down system. Also, there's money that comes into the council via the Better Care Fund, which is money that comes from the NHS that's meant to be kind of spent on activities that contribute towards the urgent care part of the health and care and wellbeing system. And what I think this would do, this move in transferring the staff and the activity to the South Bristol Community Hospital, would mean that actually it would be primarily NHS funded beyond that, and the money that the council has been spending on it wouldn't be anymore. And that's, I think, through that in the end is where the savings would be derived. So but there is a lot of, it's a very complex web, the health and care funding system, but suffice to say that the CCG NHS funding is bound into quite a lot of the work that we do and that Sirona Care and Health do.
So how much do you anticipate paying Sirona in the future then, or you think the NHS will be paying Sirona rather than Bristol City Council for that rehab service?
We wouldn't. Sirona is the NHS community services provider, so the NHS would pay for the services within Sirona. We wouldn't be paying them.
And we won't be making a budget contribution to that then?
No.
I think, Hugh, if I might just say, your offer to take Zoe through some of the issues of NHS funding, I certainly would be interested, and I think other members would be interested in. I wouldn't expect you to explain absolutely every minutiae of it, but I think a little more understanding would be really helpful, particularly with all that's going on. So whether that could be done as part of members' training or an add-on, but I think it would be helpful if you could share a few of the mysteries with us.
Yeah, I'm sure that would be really useful. And also, I know we've had conversations with Helen before about the whole integrated care service that's coming in, and in particular, something that comes up a lot is provision of GP services, making sure there's sufficient GP services, which seems to be a bit of a big disconnect at the moment. So it'd be great if we can have more awareness of how we can ensure that in the future. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Zoe.
I'd welcome that as well, Jeff, because I'm sure I'd learned something from that session, because I've only got to the Idiot's Guide so far. But I think
that's probably all we need, actually. But
if you want to do that, I might suggest to Hugh that we also get somebody from the CCG/ICS to be there, because like the GP provision, that is out with our responsibility. So we need to have somebody there who could answer those questions.
Yep, thank you. Sorry, members, but I let Zoe carry on there because I thought that was a very useful train of conversation. So I've got Christine and then Heather, and I'm not sure who after. Oh, and then Mark. So Christine. Sorry? Oh, right. Heather.
My question is related to the S117, the saving around that, and the getting staff to continue to assess service users. And it's questions about the equality impact, and specifically, I think when there's an awareness that people of BAME background statistically have the low mental health is more statistic in that community, that it's not really included, that potentially the equality impact hasn't gone far enough, and I guess is there more work to do on that, or why isn't it included or commented on?
Yeah, I'm happy to revisit the equality impact assessment. You're right, when it comes to Section 117 funding and the prevalence of issues of mental ill health across the population, poorer people generally are very much higher represented, and people from black and minoritized ethnic communities likewise. So I'm sorry, I don't know. I can check back on the EIA now, but I can dig it out of the papers that I've got. But I'm quite happy to revisit it and have another look if you feel it needs more emphasis, because it is an issue, and you're right to raise it.
Yeah, it was actually raised by one of our councillors, and yeah, I feel like it's not really included.
Yeah, okay, right. I'll note that.
Thanks.
Mark?
Thanks, Chair. Hello, Hen. I just wanted to ask about the review into home choice, because we know that housing is a massive issue for people with adult care needs, but it can be the other way around as well. And I'm dealing with a piece of casework at the moment where someone's mental health problems have been triggered by the fact that they're on the housing waiting list. So just interested in the time frame and expectations around this review. And I've got a second question on tech, investing in tech, which I'm pleased to see. And I wondered if there was any scope to support local skills and jobs, because we have a thriving tech sector in this area, and we ought to be doing that with our spend.
Great questions. I'll answer the home choice one first, and I'm sure it's no secret to tell colleagues across the chamber that working on proposals for this budget has been a very, very difficult job, and officers have had to work very hard over Christmas coming up with plans, because there was a much later recognition of the size of the scale of the issue for us. And when I give credit here to Tom Renard and Donald Graham, that when they came forward with this plan, it was just kind of manna from heaven, really, because you'll probably know, and I'm sure colleagues know if you've done casework for people with additional needs, that we haven't been meeting those needs within our own housing stock as a general rule, and they found it very difficult to get properly assessed on home choice banding and so on. And that has led to some of the use of very expensive other housing from other providers. So the idea that we're able to use our own stock to support our most needy residents has to be a good one. It's the better use of our stock, and it's a better outcome for those residents. So I think, if I remember it right, I haven't got the papers open in front of me, it's 40 people will be rehoused into our own stock this year, and next year 150, and hopefully we'll be able to carry on with that, especially with the additional council housing coming on stream. That there'll be more opportunities as well. And I think that this could have a wider impact. I'm really very enthusiastic about it, because, I mean, again, some of you will know that you might have them in your own ward. Some of the kind of what then got called over 50s schemes became, actually, they weren't very popular, so sometimes the people inappropriately have been housed in those. And I think if we can work to a way where more appropriate housing is given to people with support needs, that then looking across with our colleagues in housing services at the support given in those developments could lead to a really good model. So, and I also think things like the announcement yesterday about Gorham and Hengrove means that we can re-look at what kind of housing we're going to put on there. So if there's specific housing for people with support needs, then you know that's a good thing, and long term will save the council money. So I think it's a really exciting one. I'll go on to tech and then I'll let Hugh come into both. You're absolutely right as well that you know, we've got a fantastic tech sector here, and out at UE, which again, now that people can do visits again, I do recommend going out to have a look at it. They've got a kind of lab where all the most modern tech assistance is looked at. So that's everything from you know, building new properties with the trackways for hoists right through the properties rather than retrofitting them. It's about I mean, they're more common now anyway, aren't they? But you know, doorbells where you can see who's there and open the door from inside your sitting room. The kettle alarms when you put the kettle onto boil but there's no water in it. Reminders that you haven't taken your meds. All of those things, as well as you might have seen pictures of Pepper, the little robot, who, again, you know, fantastic to watch that in operation and encouraging people to do a bit of exercise in a chair. All of those things. So that lab is out there and is kind of, you know, world beating, and it's in Bristol, and we need to be using more of it. So some of it is about having the awareness of it for social workers who are reviewing people's cases. So we're doing more on that, but also we needed, you know, it's one of those things where we recognise that asking people to do this as kind of part of their day job was a bit too challenging, and so we need that extra investment in it, which will cause savings and give, you know, better life chances for people using the tech-enabled care.
Yeah, just very quickly on the housing one. I just think it's an excellent example of the potential of a one council approach, and really pleased. You know, it's as I say, Tom Renard, Stephen Peacock, Donald Graham, etc., coming up with solutions to corporate issues. Really, even though the corporate issue exists within the adult social care budget, it's still one of the biggest issues financially for this authority. It's a small proportion of the annual churn, the numbers that are being proposed, but it would make a significant difference if we can support eligible people who would otherwise have real problems, you know, just getting through the system in order to get onto the list. I think the main point I'd like to make also is the step down potential, because what the group of people that would in the end benefit from this are people that at the moment we've likely got placed in services that are expensive and probably too high level of provision for their needs. And so if those people can step down into general needs housing, then that leaves capacity there for people who are in very high level services to step down, and we can get that whole progression thing working much more effectively. It's not going to happen overnight, but with this capacity, it really gives us a lot to go at, a lot of potential.
Just a comment, if I may, and I'm really positive to hear the comments about tech, but I also remember the days when, admittedly, it was council employees who provided home care to the people who lived in the area in which they lived, and therefore weren't spending time travelling across the city. So if we can also use some of those approaches more with our contractors to make better use of the time that we're paying for, I would see, and I know you refer to that in your comments, but it's something that is obvious to us all, but sometimes gets lost in the contracts and the way we work. I'm going to bring...
Can I, just on that though, that's music to my ears, Jeff, because going back to John's question about the increase of people living independently at home, So we want more home care providers. And if we can get those, which we've already got. So, for example, we've got some BME-led organisations that work predominantly in the inner city, and we've got other providers who might have their kind of patch, but we've still got people who probably pass each other as they're crossing the city to go and work in, you know, Henleys when they live in Bedminster or something, and somebody doing the journey. So the more home care there is, the more we're going to be able to work with providers to kind of localise the rounds of home care. We're talking to some of the extra care housing and residential and nursing care providers about having their developments as landing pads for people who are out in the community, can call there to pick up new PPE, have a coffee, say I'm having a dreadful morning, all of those things that we know that lone workers have. So it's really a very, very positive step that we can make more of that happen. And that, back to the workforce issues, that gives people more job satisfaction, doesn't it, if they feel that they're doing something in their local community, if that's what they want, in their local community. And it also gets rid of that, you know, the wicked issue about providers not paying travel time, because if they haven't got as far between your calls, then you're not going to... you know, the issue about travel time isn't such a big one.
Yeah. Right, members, I'm planning to move on unless anyone who hasn't asked a question yet has something that they're desperate to say. Helen, Hugh, thank you. And an impressive double act, particularly at such a distance from each other. That sort of gives the message even more positively. So thank you so much. I think that leaves you free to go, Helen, but Hugh doesn't get off quite so lightly. We were going to look then at children's services and the dedicated schools grant, and really I'm in your hands as to which, is there any preference as to which way we deal with that? Yeah. Okay, right. That's fine with us. So, dedicated schools grant. Who'd like to start the questions? Christine, I somehow expect you might. Oh.
So obviously the deficit is from the high needs block, but first of all, I've got a few questions about the what was agreed.
Can I just interrupt you a moment? I'm just wondering, seeing Christina sat at the back here, I just want to check with members whether we think we're likely to have significant questions on public health. Because if we do,
I mean,
it's only that I don't want to keep you here all afternoon if there are things that you can be doing, which I imagine there are.
There's no cuts either, apart from very tiny, isn't it, in the budget?
Yeah, so I'm just...
I think I have one.
Should we? Sorry, Christine. Should we just take that and then we can at least free Christina up for the afternoon? So Heather.
Yeah, that's a good plan. I had a question about the public health money that is being allocated to the One City office, and what we think that is doing. Is that a new project? Is that new funding there? How exactly that's being used?
Thanks. So that is about investing in what we call the wider determinants of health. I think some of you will have heard me say before, if you were Director of Public Health in a city such as this, with or without a pandemic, if you didn't have a set of partnerships like we have in the One City boards and set of partnerships, you would have to create one. And over the years, you know, Bristol's had lots of types of multi-agency partnerships. But the One City set of boards and partnerships, from a public health point of view, really enables us to deliver against what we call these wider determinants of health. So we're talking about housing, economy, environment, as well as health and well-being, education, skills, all brought together in quite a magnificent sort of convening space. So rather than, I mean, I could invest in my own team, I could bring in specialist support, but actually, given we have got this fantastic convening facility, which is supported not just by the council actually, but by institutions across the city, particularly the universities and the work around the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, then it's bangs for bucks really to invest what is a smaller amount of the public health grant in that, and for that I buy a greater stake and a greater say in the sort of the health and well-being of the city through those boards, and I think it's great that our cabinet lead, Councillor King here, is the cabinet lead for public health communities and One City, because those things coming together are what really enable us to pack a punch in terms of getting upstream in terms of health building for the city. So that's the rationale behind that.
Of course, it's listed in the budget as a general revenue saving. So it is sort of implies that it is covering a budget line, it's covering work that was already happening. It's just now public health will be giving money. So I guess, you know, is this new work that is adding to public health work, or this is something that was happening, it's just the money is now coming from public health?
Yeah, so the One City space is a shared space, and for quite a while the local authority has taken the strain on that, and going forward the intention is that there'll be greater contribution from other partners. I am comfortable doing this because, to be blunt, what it buys me is greater influence in that partnership. We're already, through the Health and Wellbeing Board, we have a lot of influence. Helen's here as the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board. We're one of the boards that really work across the other boards. We have a lot of joint programmes or joint initiatives with those other boards. But putting that money in, not necessarily forever, but for the next 2 or 3 years, to enable that work to continue, which I hope it will, you know, for the sake of the city. It you know, as I say, if I didn't put it in there, I'd have to buy it from somewhere else. So given the pressures we're under, it feels like quite a smart thing to do.
Okay, so Christina, you're free to go, with a look of envy from your fellow officers, but thank you. Right, Christine, we're back to you. Sorry for that interruption.
So I've got a few questions about the formula that was put forward, that was agreed at Forum, just to check the kind of principles really underlining that in relation to the minimum funding guarantee, and so that members are better aware about what can and can be influenced at a local level within the schools block. And the other one obviously that we need to discuss is the high needs and the accumulation of the deficit. So my understanding is that this coming financial year is the last year that it can be offset with, what do you call it, when you keep money back? Reserves, that's it. It can be offset with reserves. So at the end of the next financial year, my understanding is that is no longer something that can be done by a local authority. So my question would be, what is it that officers are expecting or cabinet members expecting to happen at the end of the next financial year? We as a Green Group met, and I don't know whether it was one of, it was two men, I don't know whether it was one of you guys that came in and spoke about the safety valve for high needs. I have emailed you, Asha, as cabinet lead for this, and also the other leads, because this, if we do enter into this safety valve, we all need to understand what's going on with that. So if there's any more information that you've currently got about that, but I do want to understand what happens at the end of the next financial year when you can no longer offset it against your reserves.
I'll defer to Denise about what would happen if we didn't, if it goes up. But just to let you know where we are on the safety valve discussions and conversations. So obviously we can see the trajectory and where that's going. And both myself and the Mayor wrote to the Director, we both wrote to the Minister, both at DLUC and the DFE, to alert them to the fact that we have a growing deficit. We are aware that there are about 5 or 6 local authorities who are already working with the DFE under this safety valve. And the authorities that have already been identified, they have, just like us, an increasing level of need that needs to be met. So talking to some of the other local authorities, what they've done, DFE, they've come to an agreement, and with some they've looked at maybe putting in some financial support to reduce the deficit, but they're not going to write it off completely. Now, having read the documentation, because we got a response both from DLUC and DFE in the last few days, actually, so basically DLUC are saying that they will do everything they can to pressure or talk to the DFE about potentially supporting our bid. But when I look at the DSG management plan and the work that we've been doing, when you look at the criteria for the organisations and the local authorities that are currently under the safety valve and the best practice that is emerging, Bristol City Council is already kind of taking those steps. But one of the biggest issues for us is that we have to change the culture within this city about the way in which we address not only the high needs but provision, high needs provision for children with special educational needs. We need to try and reinforce the ethos that I'd like to spend more money in mainstream schools and keep those children who can, more so in our mainstream, and invest maybe in more high needs provision, in provision that's much more local. It's got to be much more cost effective. We're going to keep blowing the budget. So it's not just what happens after 22-23, it's what happens beyond that, because we are seeing an increase in the number of requests for early years and healthcare plans, and as the demand grows, the budget's going to grow, but the budget isn't going to get any bigger. We only got a 3.3% uplift in the overall block that we had. So, it will get kind of dangerous if we don't come to some agreement with the DFE around the kind of safety valve. And we may have to seriously look at, kind of maybe our reserves. And I think with most local authorities, as part of the deal that they do with the DFE, you have to put in a proportion, you have to kind of somehow match whatever they're going to be putting in to offset the deficit that we have. But we have got the DSG management plan. We have had discussions at School Forum. We're going back in March for further discussions and looking at further mitigations against that. But it really is about having a conversation both with parents and schools and academies across the city about changing the culture and the way in which we deliver SEN provision here in the city. There are other local authorities who are kind of managing, and they are nowhere near. I mean, we've gone from 2 million deficit to we are looking at maybe £45 million deficit in 23-24 if we don't manage it now. And that's all down to need, a growing need in the city. So, and we don't have even if we went into our reserves, I still think we couldn't, because we can't use all of it. But I'll ask
because I had a very serious conversation with Denise before Christmas about what could happen to us if we didn't get this under control. Denise, do you want to just give a little?
Yeah, just to reinforce what Ash has said in relation to the self-assessment against the safety valve criteria. I'm very happy we circulated that and published that as part of the most recent schools forum, because that is basically the thematics throughout the education transformation programme, which of course is funded by the top slice of the high needs block. I'm very happy to circulate that following this meeting to scrutiny members if they would like to see the detail behind that. In relation to the what will happen, obviously Denise may want to add some, but basically you're absolutely right. At the moment there is a certain level of protection in regards to that deficit being a responsibility or being picked up by the actual council budget. That is due to drop away in 2023. And so at the moment that would mean that we would have to have the reserve, the contingency to cover that, which obviously adds a significant amount of pressure to the council's budget.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, and the principles for the schools block and why why the MFG is where it is, why what you chose in terms of the MFG, why you chose it in that way, what implications that has in terms of freeing up money and how you can use that money for the kind of priorities for the local authority. Just so people understand, just so councillors are better understood that there is an influence over the schools block in a way that maybe they think that actually it's all formula and it comes in and it goes back out again. But there are local controls there are things at a local level.
Absolutely, and obviously the £1.5 million that we agreed, the school forum have a say. They can decide whether or not they can move money into the high needs block or leave it where it is, and they have agreed to kind of invest in our transformation program to enable us to kind of mitigate and support the increasing workload that we have around SEN. So yes, there is a level of it is formula based, but then the school forum make the decision as to whether or not they would like to transfer money across, which is what they did at their, I think it was not their last meeting.
Do you want to add to that, Alison, about the actual local formula?
Sorry, so in return to the actual process, so you're absolutely right. So Schools Forum consult with all schools and settings during the course of the budget setting process. There is the flexibility to direct some of the funding and move between the blocks on an annual basis. Now, this is the last year that we're going to be able to do that. That flexibility, should the hard or national funding formula come in next year, which it is intended to do, then it will be fixed. So for this year, and it follows previous years, we've certainly directed additional funding to additional educational needs factors within that formula, and obviously the full consultation went through Schools Forum as well.
Right. Tim.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about around the high needs funding block, and obviously the pressure continues to grow. I was just wondering, is there a relationship between that pressure and growth, at least some sort of relationship, and provision of special school places? So we know there is a shortage of special school places and a capital programme to deliver those. So whether if that's sped up or slowed down, would that have an effect? And if there's also a shortage, does that also mean that we see more children going to independent schools? And if we do, I don't know if we do, does that cost us more per placement than a local authority special school on average, or is there no difference, I guess is my question.
Alison may be able to give you more detail about the cost of independent school, any independent school particularly the out-of-school placements, is far more expensive. And one of the things that I think we're exploring as part of the transformation plan is using the capital funding that we are going to invest in additional SEND provision, but we are, as part of the transformation process, talking to other local authorities as well, bordering local authorities as well, to see whether or not, because we're all in this together, they have just as much stresses on their DSG as we do. So I think that there is more than enough scope for us to be talking to our neighbouring authorities and looking at a coordinated, collaborative approach to how we address children who need kind of more independent provision. But I'd rather see that independent provision closer to home than sending children 200-300 miles away. There will always be a need, as you know, for some independent provision that is extraordinarily quite expensive. But we are seeing a huge uptick in the number of children with autism, mental health impact, and a growing need for children with complex needs. So there will always, but I think it's also a case of, when I've looked at the numbers, we've just had a huge uptick in the demands for EHCPs, and I want to work with parents and schools to try and ensure that some of the schools are holding our children, because there is an issue for me personally around, I'd rather invest the SEN high needs block in purposeful and meaningful provision that can keep some children better integrated or in local provision, as opposed to just sending our children out of area. But yeah, the demand is growing, and we've seen that exponentially over the last 2-3 years.
Just to follow that up very briefly, and I think that was helpful. On the issue of EHCPs, I mean, traditionally the city is proportionally below the England average.
We are.
So do you think actually we're beginning to come up to the England average? We are we're still below it at the moment.
We're still very low. We're starting to come up. Obviously, we've invested, kind of more resources and more SEN staff to enable that process to happen. But remember, we're part of this longer chain. I'm still stressed about. I did say to somebody the other day, the government. I don't know where they got the idea from that a 20-week process was going to be sufficient when you think about all of the players you need to rely on to get to the point where we can get an EHCP in time. And I think we're doing a lot more. I'm very much cognizant of the fact that there are still some parents who have waited longer than that period, but we're trying to get on top of it. But actually, we need to wait for the SEN review and actually also make our views known about the process. And obviously, parents are going to be very much a part of that. But the whole process needs to be reformed. It's as simple as that. And they say the review is coming. We're still waiting. So let's see what happens out of that.
Alison, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to the 2 points. I'll start in reverse order. So in terms of the current numbers of education, health and care plans that we have in the system, we are below, low compared to our statistical neighbours and nationally. We've got a couple of sort of hypotheses in terms of why we think that is. One is definitely due to the lag in terms of the response to the 2014 reforms in Bristol, and so we're definitely seeing an increase in that as we get the system working far more efficiently. The other element, though, I think is very much a more positive element, and that's to do with the fact that we are one of the local authorities that have access for non-statutory top-up funding. So you don't need to have an education, health and care plan in order to receive resources to support you within the mainstream setting. And what we've seen from other authorities that would maybe used to have that that system in place and then have moved away from that is they saw a really significant, more so than we're seeing in Bristol, increase in requests for education, health and care plans. So it's a real balance in terms of the ensuring that funding for that earlier intervention and non-statutory intervention is in place, as well as obviously making sure that those young people who require an education, health and care plan can get that effectively as well. In relation to your other question about sufficiency, you're absolutely right. Again, it is all linked. So we really are looking at this in terms of a complete system response. It's a whole system piece that has a number of elements, and the self-assessment that we did against the safety valve recommendations is looking at each of those areas. So lack of sufficiency in terms of specialist provision is definitely part of it. For some young people, we do need to send them out of authority or to a residential, and that's absolutely right for that young person. For others, it's because we haven't got enough sufficient places to meet their needs within the city. So the more that we can increase Bristol's provision, the better value our spend becomes in terms of places and supporting those young people. And then, of course, the other side of that is the more that we do at the school-based stages of the Code of Practice, so really making sure that mainstream schools are able to meet a wide diversity of special educational needs and that families feel confident that they don't require a special school place for that young person. Again, the more effective our whole end-to-end system becomes.
So if I can make a few comments on that, and I'm wary with Christine and Tim, who are more knowledgeable on this area than I am. But to me, it's positive, Ashley, you're talking about provision within the city. Way before your time, but within or close to my ward, Elmfield School and St Christopher's, the council used to place pupils at both those schools and went through phases of placing them out of county rather than sending them to those schools. Now, I don't know all the reasons, and in a way I don't need to know all those reasons, but certainly St Christopher's is no longer there and no longer available. And yet, from the casework that I pick up, it's very clear that my residents still have a need for that level of very special support. So I'm hoping we are moving in that direction. But it also links in, and as Helen's still here, I can raise it to another item of casework I came up with a young adult and with special needs, and the fact that their training and further education is sourced very close to the time when they get to 18, and it's short notice and is therefore more expensive, even though we had known, health permitting, they were going to get to 18 and need that provision. So I'm sort of hopeful that the story that Helen and Hugh are talking about in terms of special needs adults and the elderly that we're planning the journey through, I'm hoping that if we can do that, we could actually see that we could be providing for what we need and controlling it, rather than having prices determined by external providers or authorities who are having to fulfill an urgent need because we haven't managed to plan it. So it's really just a plea that I think every parent has a challenge dealing with children growing into becoming adults, but those with special needs have an even greater challenge and actually need the certainty sooner than would otherwise be the case. And therefore, are we able to take that on board on that journey through their needs?
So I'm going to call on my own experience, having managed the West of England commissioning for LLDD provision back in 2010. When I worked for South Gloucestershire Council, and we had, so what we're doing now with SEND as individual authorities, we did it jointly with the 4 local authorities. We had a joint commissioning approach. I can't remember if Mike was still at North Somerset at the time, maybe he wasn't, but I was working with the 4 DCSs, and we came up with the plan of how we were going to do. when the new EHCP process came through. And I think what was really important at that time is that we as local authorities, we have the data. If you get the data right, we should be able to plan ahead. We know the children who are coming through the system. It's about that early intervention. So if we know we have a cohort of children who have particular needs, then we could be planning and saying, okay, we need to either build this provision, or we need to make sure that there's provision 5 years down the road to enable those to come through. And actually, that was some of the work that we were doing back in 2010. I left the authority. The joint commissioning process went back into the individual local authorities, and everybody did their own, has done their own thing. So it's kind of like I'm trying to not reinvent the wheel, but I think it's really important that I do have the conversation with the other 4 authorities, because you know, I can see from some of the placements, we were looking at children in care yesterday, and you know, I'm really proud of the fact that the vast majority of our children in care are placed in Bristol or just in our neighbouring authorities, and less and less further afield. And ideally, we want to build more SEN provision closer to home, as well as children's homes or residential accommodation for the children who are in our care. So, yeah, I'm on that mission. So, yeah, watch this space, but I'll keep you all informed of the progress that we make on this. But officers have already started the conversation, and I know that's happening through the Southwest Local Authority kind of leads meetings that are happening.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, and just to add really, you're absolutely right in terms of that preparation for adulthood. It's a significantly important point in that young person's journey. And we've actually been funding a pilot piece of work from Adult Social Care Budget, Children's Social Care and Education, to look at that preparation for adulthood and really ensuring that we have a much more robust system from age of 14. So really looking at building independence in each annual review to look at what that young person is going to need, but doing that thinking ahead from the age of 14, and making sure that we're really supporting through to adulthood. And then the other piece, which you may want to comment on, is the whole life course. So what we have in our systems are lots of little mini cliff edges for our children and young people, whether that's transitioning from early years to Key Stage 1, whether it's into secondary school, and certainly for our young people with learning difficulties and SEND, it's that transition into adulthood. So again, working together very much in a multi-agency way, multidisciplinary way, how can we have a seamless resource and support for that young person all the way through to adulthood in terms of that life course piece. I don't know, Hugh, whether you wanted to add anything to that.
No, you've covered it pretty well there, Alison. I mean, I think the again for me, aside from the fact that children's and adults systems, services, perennial issue in regard to their disjoint up and down the land, local authorities wrestle with it. 1 or 2 places claim to have cracked it, and we're looking at those. But the reality is that they're completely different regulatory and financial and professional systems, and so consequently it's harder than it sounds to create a proper bridge between them. That said, we are committed to this life course piece, and I think that the important point to note is this concept again of progression. The idea that when we work with anybody, if you know anybody in any field of life, any walk of life, you look towards aspiring to achieve things, moving forwards in your life, having plans, doing the things that you want to do, and that kind of basic underpinning ethos is lacking in a lot of services. And we found it with the findings from the Stephen Bubb report. I don't know whether most people would, no doubt, have heard of that Stephen Bubb report into autism and learning disabilities approaches in Bristol. And we're addressing it across the board because the whole concept of progression needs to be woven through the fabric of every bit of service delivery that we do.
Can I just also add as well, I think we have the added bonus as well as the parents forums and all the other groups, because I had a meeting last week with, I didn't even realize, 21 different organizations that are supporting children with SEND and their parents and families. But we now obviously have the new Disability Equality Commission as well, and having spoken to the chair and some members, you know, again, they will be helping to not reinforce but support the journey so that we can become a real leader, I suppose, around disability equality and supporting children, young people and adults with SEN. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Asha.
Can I just add that Alan Davies, who's the chair of the Disability Equality Commission, is leading our task and finish work into the Stephen Bubb report. So the Disability Equality Commission has been commissioned by Marvin as its first piece of work to actually drive that, drive the findings of that report through, and for us to meet the challenges that Stephen Bubb lays down and the recommendations he makes.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. Any other question, Tim?
Thanks. I've got a question which might be a bit more mundane after all that high-level stuff, but it's about the savings in the home-to-school transport commissioning arrangements. I just wanted to check, £284,000 worth of savings, is that entirely made from the drive to make the system more efficient, or is there also some saving built in there for changes to the policy of how that works? Because Asha, you mentioned something about that yesterday, and I was a bit concerned about that, to be honest.
Yeah, so again, I'm someone who looks at best practice or good practice in other local authorities, and I've spoken to my counterparts in a number of authorities through the LGA. So I've yet for the staff to come back to me with the revised proposals. So we are looking at revising both the policy as well as looking at the efficiency savings that could be made when we recommission out the school home transport policy.
But can I just check that the savings we've got in the budget for this year don't take account of any changes of policy? They're purely based on efficiency savings, is in terms of combining things? Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
They are.
So we can have a conversation about changes to policy at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, just to confirm, it's in relation to third-party spend.
But I am always looking at other ways to be efficient. So.
Yeah, just as somebody who used home-to-school transport for a long time, I know you mentioned something about contributions from people yesterday.
But the contribution would be, where I've seen it work, and it seems to work well in local authorities, it would only be for those who can afford it. There
right,
would be
okay, yes.
Yeah, it's affordability.
I know, often parents of children with special needs work less hours because of the difficulties of getting their children to schools further away and having to look after them more, not able to leave them on their own after school, that kind of thing. So they quite often are the people least able to afford the contribution. Yeah, thanks.
We will consult.
Any other comments on the dedicated schools grant in particular?
Just a quick confirmation on that previous topic about home to schools transport. Is it entirely private hire vehicles we use to transport children around, or is it buses as well?
I'm not sure. I think it's a
combination. It's a combination.
It's a combination of both.
Can I have a split of what that combination is, please? And do you have any details about whether the vehicles are optimised for occupancy? Like, are all the seats full of the cars, for instance?
I can take that away as an action and follow up with the detail.
Thank you.
I think it's safe to say it's likely not, because that's the point of consolidating it via a more efficient procured system, so that we actually do make maximum benefit of the journeys that are being made.
Chair, if I could just say this as well. You can't always fill all the seats in a car if you've got special needs children, because you can't necessarily have them more than one in a back seat, for instance. They might not take to having another child sit next to them, so it's not purely a numbers game.
Can I also say as well, there are also children who may be out of area placement, and you have to pay for a taxi or something to actually take them 200-300 miles away, and it is the only child, maybe then their parent in the car. So as Councillor Rippington said, it's not always appropriate for the transport or a car to be full of kids with SEN. You have to take on board their specific needs.
I think it's interesting with home to school transport in that it was, when I first came onto council, it was an issue that was going to be cut to save money, and taking Tim's point, and if you took Claremont School as an example, and you couldn't look at how you wouldn't be looking at how you do that efficiently. You would look at how you did it with causing minimum trauma to the pupils who are being transported. So there may be wider issues in looking at whether the transport is as efficient as it can be, and it probably isn't as ecologically sound as it could be, because some of it seems to have been around a long time. But on the other hand, it's also expensive transport because it has to accommodate the equipment that's needed for that individual to get in. So I think it's a valid question that we should keep on the agenda, but it's one of the few cases where I would see it was lower down the list of priorities than it might otherwise be in other areas.
I would say, my brother had special educational needs, and I remember as a child having to use their home to school transport, which was a coach that used to come and pick all these children up along route and take him to, I think he was at Henbury Manor for the first few years of his life. So I kind of, and it was really important for my parents that my brother was here in Bristol, not sent far away from home. So I'm not sure what it looks like now, but it's something that we will review and when we're looking at the policy.
And Christine?
So I'd still like to understand what's happening with the local funding formula for the mainstreams from the school block, how that measures to the national funding formula and that kind of possible cliff edge that we've been discussing over the last few years. And the second question is in relation to the 6 million that is going to be needed for this September for mainstream year 7s. So I suppose because you're at phase 2, we're looking at primary estate, investing for SEN places. How is that thinking feeding into those new year 7 places? Because 5 or 6 years' time, we're going to have an excess of secondary school places in the city, but we'll still need SEN places for those kids coming through.
Yeah, so just in terms of the second part to that question with the sufficiency, so the 6 million is obviously investing in increasing the number of year 7 places for September 2022. That is increasing existing estate, and obviously we are waiting for the new secondary provision to be built as well in 2023 and onwards. The challenge of the excess secondary provision, as we see that kind of bulge come down, is obviously something we are really mindful of, because we've seen that come through primary, and we've got that concern with some of our primary schools at the moment who have that additional space. What we're doing is talking to our school leaders about that sort of repurposing the provision as we move forward. So obviously we are continuing with the increase in specialist provision within the existing estate. We're obviously waiting to see what happens with the SEN review and any allocation of free school monies and potential for special schools, but certainly that phase 2 is about increasing the existing estate. As we see that bulge come down, then we need to be thinking about, as I say, how we reutilise that space. That's the conversations we're having with primaries at the moment, where they can actually open a resource space, look at nurture provision, inclusive provision, to make sure that we have a real kind of mixed economy across our system, and not just exclusively looking at mainstream and special as two completely separate things. So you're right, we'll at some point see those numbers come down, but there is a potential to be quite creative about how we're using and utilising that space. But at the moment, obviously, secondary provision is that priority as much as specialist.
maybe try and take the first part of Councillor Townsend's question. So, and Christina, you're probably more knowledgeable than I am on this, so but I'm going to give a good overview, hopefully, of where we are. And I think the point that you were really trying to make is that are we truly scrutinising the schools block, and also our members are aware of the flexibility that they do have and some of the decisions being made. So I think that was the challenge that Christine was really trying to make. So I think in terms of understanding a little bit more about the schools funding formula, there are some areas that are mandatory, such as, for example, the sort of per pupil, minimum per pupil rates, and also we have what's denoted as the national funding formula, soon to become the hard funding formula. But at the moment there's a small amount of local discretion in terms of how some of that funding can be allocated. Some of that decision making sits with the schools forum and some of that sits appropriately with the council. What we have done in terms of the approach being adopted is to fully consult with all of our schools and also schools forum, and just for members sort of awareness, we have basically supported the proposals that have come through those mechanisms, and actually supported the recommendations there. But just to give you an overview of some of the areas that have been considered, one of the areas will be what is the level that we set of the minimum funding guarantee. We have historically set that at a minimum level based on, I think, 0.5% of the totality. That provides additional flexibility to be able to redirect some of the funding while we still have some local discretion to some of the other areas in terms of additional educational need. We also have some discretion in terms of the lump sum payment between primary and secondary school, and I think for 22-23 the lump sum has been preserved at a fixed level of 125,000 for both primary and secondary. And some of that is also as a result of reflecting the implications and the challenges to all schools and settings as a result of the pandemic. There are also decisions that we make in terms of the additional educational factor, and that's been reviewed and agreed with this subgroup and with the schools forum. But approximately, just for information, about 65 million of our totality of our funding is redistributed based on the on those additional factors as well. That's just an overview of some of the areas where we do have discretion, and that discretion has been applied in setting the 22-23 budgets. I think obviously once we move to a hard funding formula, we won't have that, and that will have a significant impact on some of our schools, which will be adversely impacted by that, and obviously further details will come through in terms of the changes and proposals should that happen. But I think that's probably a reasonable overview. But like I said, Christine, being on the subgroup for quite a lot of time, knows a lot more detail than me about the additional educational factors.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just think it's really important that elected members understand that we do have some local control over some of this funding, and 65 million is a considerable amount of money. I just suppose I have one final question. Are you satisfied, Denise, that the formula that has been put through to forum and agreed has maximised the investment in the mainstream in the disadvantaged and vulnerable children to as much as is possible at a local level?
Yes, and I'd say we have, because we've obviously gone again for the absolute minimum in terms of funding guarantee, given the fact that we still have to ensure that the minimum per pupil levels are adhered to, and as a result optimising the amount that we can distribute based on the additional needs factor, and that's continued.
Okay, members, I plan to move on from DSG and just want to check whether there's anything on children's services in general anyone wants to ask while we have Alison here. Otherwise, I'll go straight on to the resources budget. Okay, we'll move on to resources. Alison, thank you for your time. So, resources budget. Who would like to start? In which case, I'll while you're gearing up, Michael, Denise, one question I had was, which we asked and we had a written answer to, which was the question regarding summonses and debt collection, and I still couldn't quite understand how it appeared we had an income from issuing summonses, because I imagine the legal cost of issuing the summons would be a cost we were incurring. So I didn't quite understand that line and the written answer. So I would just appreciate a clarification if I could on that.
I think Denise is better placed than me on that, Jeff.
Yes. So when we basically issue summons, there is a cost to issuing the summons that we add to the totality of the debt, but the cost is based on the cost of actually the debt collection activity. We have a budget, which we have always had, so we have an income line, I think is approximately about 1.2 million, which is our income targets, and we charge approximately £79 per summons. Now, the fact that we haven't been actually going through to a summons process and a court process, it means that the income line that we have, which is in the budget, is lower than anticipated as a result of that, but it is a recovery cost that's attributed to each summons.
So is that cost actually paid out, or is that an internal cost that is incurred anyway?
It's calculated based on the total cost of recovery activity, and what basically happens is that when a summons is issued, that cost is added to the summons and then paid as part of that settlement.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, David.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about saving R1, which is reduced customer service point budget. Considering this is one of the most successful components of the council, and that has been through the pandemic, I just wondered how we're actually going to save money there, please. What are you actually going to cut for £165,000?
Yeah, sorry. So apologies if I missed the beginning of this. So I think the idea is that we move to be more supportive through various other means, freeing up. So employing, for example, live WhatsApp chats, those sorts of things which free up customer service resource effectively. So we're able to release customer service resource, some of which is already missing, through bot conversation, chatbots, WhatsApp conversation, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Heather, and then Tim.
Looking at the resources summary budget, I'm looking at page 105 of the budget, which is the savings. There's a line of the summary of the resources budget that says digital transformation for 14.5 million. I've kind of gone round in circles on this, and I think I understand now, but I wanted to check. There's a project for digital transformation, which is less than this amount. And I think that I understand that this, when it says digital transformation, is in fact all of our IT or digital services and not just the transformation project.
Yes, you're right. It's actually the name of the whole division, which includes the customer service. So it's just shorthand. Digital transformation is a directorate. Yeah.
Slightly complicated if we're looking at a digital transformation project as well. And got me very confused about what projects we're capitalising and all sorts, because obviously with the specific project, I understand that is mostly capitalised, and I think that we are optimising what we can capitalise of that project. And I guess of this whole 14.5 million, do we feel like we have optimised what we can capitalise out of the work that we are doing in there?
I mean, Denise may want to comment further, but again, I think we're at risk of conflating two different things. So that significant cost there includes the large in-house staff we have for managing our IT budget, but it also includes the citizen services. So it's a bundle of things that we have called as shorthand the digital transformation division. There is a question about the digital transformation project and what element of that can appropriately be charged to capital, which is a live issue. And Denise was advising me today that we're still awaiting the promised government guidance that is meant to be clarifying the extent to which transformation expenditure can legitimately be charged to capital. But that's not what's being covered here at all. This is the cost of the division within the Directorate.
Can I ask if that will always be called digital transformation and if that is the most sensible name for it?
It possibly might not be. I think you're all aware, shortly I'm going to be proposing some changes to the senior management structure as a result of a number of personnel changes that are occurring. That may well end up being called something different shortly.
I would strongly suggest that there might be other names that would make more sense.
Or a new name for the project, either or.
Tim and then Martin.
Yeah, thanks. Very simple one. Can I just confirm that there are no cuts to the museum service in the budget this year? Is that right?
I don't know if we've got anyone here to talk about that apart from me. So no, there are some staffing reductions expected within the museum. So, well, within the culture team actually. So, quite how that plays out. There's no expectation to close museums or reduce opening times, for example.
Okay, I was just looking for that on the list of savings.
It is in the savings somewhere. I'll find it and let you know.
Martin and then Mark.
Yeah, thank you. One of the I've got a couple, 2 or 3 here. The R16, which is reviewing private finance initiative management charges. I'm all for reviewing management charges if they can be reduced, but I mean, I'm puzzled what was happening before, because the council has been paying for the PFI contracts, but if it's going to charge a management fee, who's paying the management fee if it's the one paying for the private finance charges?
Yeah, so the council has a number of PFI contracts. Some of those are paid for by schools and some are paid for by the council. We've actually increased our team quite significantly to actually monitor the PFI contracts, and this is proposing that all of their charges are appropriately recharged. So at present they're only partial recharge, so the proposal is to increase some of the charge that will be applied to the contract to support the management and monitoring of the actual contract, also some of the benchmarking work that we have been doing and some of the other areas that we've been doing to drive value in those contracts, and so that the end users are actually picking up a lower cost. So it's just about ensuring that those teams are fully being recharged to the contracts.
Okay, so it's some of it's recharging, but some is lowering the cost, because otherwise we'd just
no, absolutely.
Moving
so
the money
a lot
around.
of the work that we have been doing is trying to ensure that we are driving value by monitoring more closely, working with the providers, the contractors on the benchmarking, ensuring that we get value for money, etc. And we also always demonstrate all of the efficiencies that have been driven, and that those roles are purely self-financing in reality.
Okay, thank you. Can I take another one? R18, it's reduce spend on learning and development, and it suggests that this is done to prioritise organisational sort of priority themes like equality and inclusion and so on. Is there a substantial amount that wasn't meeting organisational priorities? So we were paying for learning and development that was much wider. Is that a significant sum? Because it says, I think, £95,000.
I mean, I think it is what it says. I mean, I think you can always continue honing your priorities, and it's not to say that the previous expenditure was irrelevant. We've had to go through a process of making sure that, you know, we are absolutely focusing on the very highest priorities, and that's what we've done here. So, you know, there will be some learning and development that had value that we will no longer be able to pursue, but we've had to focus on the top priorities.
Mark?
Thanks, Chair. I'm pleased to see a reduction in our dependency on external policy and strategy consultancy. I've always had a view that that ought to be within the council, and I see a link to the earlier proposal to invest in our capacity as an organisation. And I was going to ask whether that capacity work is going to include policy development and to have those skills internally, which is obviously a read across to the work that we're doing here today as well. I think it's really important that we retain that capacity internally.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So it's linked, but not directly, to a piece of work that you may have heard of in a different context, which is the Common Activities Review. So policy and strategy work is one of the areas that is currently quite dispersed across the organisation. We have a relatively small corporate policy team, but there's policy and strategy work going on in different services right across the council. We do think by taking a much more coherent and coordinated approach about how policy work is done across the whole of the council, we can get much more value out of that and potentially make some efficiency savings as well. So as a result of doing that work, Tim Borrett has offered up this saving, as you say, because we should have more in-house capacity, better focused, again, on the council's priorities, and therefore able to forego that pot of money that was available to buy in that advice previously.
Can I raise one other point, please? Let's just come back to this customer service point issue. Just to really have an assurance, because some people, and we know from our casework, need that face-to-face contact, particularly if they're dealing with complicated issues. They find it difficult to deal with them on the phone. They might not have internet access. Just have assurance that that support is going to be there, and in locations which are accessible, because a lot of people will be using public transport.
Absolutely, Mark. So there'll be no change to accessibility. I think the, sorry, I probably badly explained myself because I was just sitting down previously, but essentially at the moment there are a range of people, myself and others I'm sure, who only have time to deal with council related issues at 10 o'clock at night when they get home, and they like to do it online and they don't want to have to speak to someone. There are also a range of people who absolutely need that telephone or face-to-face contact. So by maximising the amount of time or the capacity we have to deal with those people who want to deal online through chatbots or through WhatsApp or through any of those other things, it frees up our call handling resources to be able to deal, or face-to-face resources, to be able to deal with those things more constructively, I guess, or more, yeah, with more time to spend on them rather than trying to rush them off the phone to get to the next one. Yeah. So that's the plan, and we can save money by doing that at the same time. And we do carry a number of vacancies sort of perpetually in that department anyway, because turnover is so fast. So we should be able to do it without there being any impact. In fact, it should be a positive one.
Anything else on resources? Martin, David and Zoe.
Thank you. R29 says seek an additional small contribution from the external partners to running the Bristol City office, which was mentioned earlier. And it's a very small sum. It's 5%. It says £5,000. But it says over and above the existing plans for a 50-50 split between the council half and the external partners, the other half. So what is the current split? Because, well, I'll start with that.
Sorry, I'm just going to try and find that for you. Can you come back to me in a minute? I don't know it off the top of my head. Sorry. 1 second. Or what? A couple of minutes. Do you want to come back to me on that in a few minutes?
Okay. Yeah, we'll come back on that one, David, and then Zoe.
Thank you, Chair. Bottom of the list, R9, the review of chargeable services and income. Can we know what chargeable services are going to be changed? Because it's quite a broad range of topic for £157,000 worth of savings.
Denise may want to add to this, but this is actually an overarching look at how the council could better manage its approach to fees and charges. So you'll have seen elsewhere in the budget, there are some specific proposals about increasing fees and charges. And I think we're conscious that we would benefit from having a more consistent approach and some coordination and management of how we tackle this issue across the council as a whole. So within Denise's team, there's some work being done about establishing a more comprehensive, consistent and systematic approach to how we keep those things under review and maximise them going forward. So my understanding, Denise, is this one's about not specific areas, it's about that more, is that more systematic approach overall?
Yes, and apologies, I missed the first part of the question. I was distracted trying to understand the City Office and what the funding was for that. So I think your question was in relation to what the strategic review of fees and charges is going to entail to some degree, and the fact that it is over and above that is already there. There's two elements. There's one that is around the processes as well and ensuring consistency. So if we agree principles, ensuring that those are consistently applied, and also doing a bit more of a review and having possibly a commissioned, external commissioned review to really understand that or ensure that the council is optimising its fees and charges, really having a look at how we compare, how we benchmark. Is there more that we could do? Is there areas where we are possibly overcharging to actually do that review and then come back with a full report to see where there are other opportunities? So it is two-pronged, one around improving our processes, ensuring that we are applying the principles that we agree around subsidies, etc. as well, but around inflationary uplifts. And then the second element is more of a strategic review to really explore what are the opportunities for local authority in terms of income maximisation as well as part of that. So that's the piece of work which will then be a full report to come back to ourselves to then consider.
Thank you for that. But the line does read to me like you have a list of chargeable services that you're going to be looking at reviewing. But if there's not a list, can that statement be more explicit, please?
Well, I mean, while Denise is thinking about it, I think effectively what we're saying is, yes, there is a list because we're going to try and take a consistent approach to all the fees and charges across the council. But what I'm saying is we haven't got a particular target in mind about where we think there's the opportunity. It's about a system and a process. But in doing that, we'll want to look right across all the fees and charges that the council provides. So there is a list, which is effectively all of them.
Thank you.
Do we have an answer to Martin's?
Sorry, Martin. You wanted to know, what did you want to know? The way that it's split, how it's funded.
Yes. Sorry, because reading this, it suggests that 5% of the cost of the City Office is £5,000. That the plan is to be a 50-50 council and partner funded, but it implies that it isn't at the moment. So I'm wondering what the proportion is. All we're adding is 5% at the moment.
Yeah, I don't have...
Sorry, all we're saving is going to be 5%, but presumably we want to save 50% if we haven't already got a 50-50 share of the costs.
I think that 5% was to work on getting more partners involved in funding it. That's the idea. But sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me and I can't seem to find it, so I'll have to come back to you on that.
So I don't have the precise detail either, but so when the City Office was first launched, it was set up on the basis that the council funding would taper away and there'd be a 50% contribution from other partners. I do know that we've secured a number of commitments that I think do get us pretty much to that 50% funding. I think this is about an additional 5,000 on top of getting to that 50-50 funding, because I think we've made quite a bit of progress with that recently. I can't answer your question, Martin, about whether 5% is 5,000. I don't quite understand that percentage figure, so we'll have to come back to you on that. But just to say, the intention is, and I think we are pretty much there, that it will be 50-50 going forward, and this would be on top of that. But we'll get you the detailed answer.
Heather, is it on this issue? Yeah, okay. Nope.
Yeah, that sort of delved into us. The pertinent question, I think, is the original agreement was 50-50 funded between partners and the council. And this, it feels like something that is changing that agreement so that it will not be 50% or not half sort of funded by the council. And I'm just wondering if that has any impact to the power and the decision making, and how the One City operates, because it's specifically listing that this would then change in terms of funding that power. So yeah, is that significant, and anything that we need to know about that?
So I would say no, and the genesis of this is actually when all services were asked to make a contribution towards the council's budget challenge. Everyone was asked to think about where you could make a 5% contribution to closing the gap. I suspect that's where the 5% came from. So Tim Borrett, who's the director in that area, felt that it was appropriate that this area made its 5% contribution just like everywhere else. I'm absolutely confident it doesn't change the dynamics with partners. But I am now speculating that that's where the 5% came from, and I will double check that. But that's my guess, actually.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, there is a broader governance review of the City Office going on, and about how that may operate in the future, transcending political cycles and so on.
Okay, good. Oh, yeah, because to follow on from that, I know that there's a call for partners to join the boards, or some of them, but do those partners think they're going to have to make a financial contribution, and will that affect their involvement in the boards? Does being a partner that makes a financial contribution give additional access or advantages to one that can't make that contribution?
No, absolutely not. No. So the call for people to join the boards is an open one. Effectively, doesn't matter if you contribute or not.
Heather?
You've just mentioned that there's a governance review happening of the One City boards. What role is there for the council scrutiny members to be involved in that review?
That's a good question, Ellie. I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Have you seen the expressions of interest?
The review of how the board is governed. So if there is, if we're looking at the governance of this pretty crucial part of the council's work, how will the members who are involved in scrutiny of the council be involved in that review?
Well, there's a specific criteria for joining the board, and you have to fulfil that to be on it. It wouldn't be right for there to be an overrepresentation of BCC councillors and staff to be on there. It needs to be proportionate, and the idea is that we get more representation from city partners more than anything else to make that to bring in the partnerships part of that procedure.
I understand your point about being proportionate. It's interesting that proportionate currently means no opposition councillors on any of the boards. But that wasn't quite what I was asking. It was about these decisions that are if we were doing a review of governance, if we were doing a review of policy, there would be an opportunity for scrutiny to be involved in that. One City is I think this area that a lot of people find quite confusing, that it obviously is a partnership and other partners are involved. We understand that. But it is quite a significant chunk of BCC money and resources. So what role will councillors who are involved in scrutiny have with that governance review?
I think ultimately the point is to move this away from being a council thing. I think the One City was never meant to be a part of the council, essentially. It was supposed to be a partnership organisation, so the council would, as with every other organisation in the city, create its own strategies. Those strategies would then feed up into an overarching plan agreed outside of the council, and there's not council, not a council body. So therefore, the long game for the governance of the One City is to move it away from the council. The council becomes one player, along with the universities, along with education, along with faith groups, whomever, the public. As that broadens out into the city. So that's the theory.
If that happens, I wonder if there would then be a difference in terms of seeing One City and One City plans popping up quite regularly in our policy. In things within the council, it's quite often referred to that we are in line with One City policy, but it concerns me when those One City policies aren't scrutinised by the members in the democratic way that's agreed for all of our other policies.
Mike?
Then they're not policies. Like they don't have that governing power that our decisions have to in the council, and it wouldn't be right for us to be scrutinising what our city partners do from the perspective of councillors, because it's not a council-owned entity. So yeah, the idea is that it is a city-owned entity with city goals and aspirations that we're working towards, and not, the council is but one party in that.
Right, can I take Mike and then Nicola?
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to remind members, and actually for new members, they wouldn't be aware of this. So Andrea Dell, who heads up the One City office, has come to scrutiny on an annual basis to talk about the One City plan. So members have had an opportunity to review and comment on the One City plan. As Councillor King is saying, the approach that we've adopted is, nevertheless, the focus for members has been on those actions that are the responsibility of the City Council within the One City plan, and you will see those actions appearing in the business plan and the service plans that will be coming through the scrutiny process over the next few months. So you'll get the chance to scrutinise and look at the things that the Council is saying it will contribute to the One City approach as part of our business and service planning. And I think, I can't remember whether it would have been Osm or Resources, but Andrea has as part of an annual cycle come and talked about the work of the One City office. So perhaps we could pick that up as part of the appropriate scrutiny work plan.
I think that's coming to Osm in March.
There you go.
That's a very good point, actually. And we are meeting with Osm in order to discuss how they meet up with One City. So I think that's this week, actually. So that process will get started. But yeah, and also we have a cross-party invites to some of our city gatherings, and so there is that opportunity to engage.
Nicola?
Thanks, Jeff. Much of what I was going to contribute has just been covered by Mike, actually, but I'm now speaking as the co-chair of the Environment Board, is just to remind members that the One City Plan does come to scrutiny through that route with Andrea, because I remember last year having a long conversation with her. It was actually when I was in the planning cabinet role, but around the Environment One City goals, which I now obviously happen to co-chair. I would just say that the Environment Board meetings, members are also eligible to come and take part in those and participate in the sessions. They're public, and so it's not something that happens kind of exclusive of representatives of the council. But, and as an open offer there, really, Heather, that you could contact me at any time about the discussions that take place in that. But actually, the majority of the discussion in the Environment Board is actually things that are outside of the council's control. A good example recently being about water quality.
So I think, just, Heather, to pick on the points you've made, because Mike quite rightly pointed out that reports have been brought to Osm on a regular basis. What you didn't quite say, Mike, however, was that Osm regularly recorded that it wished to be more involved in the One City. And from my point of view, that was not for members to be challenging what was happening, because I personally saw it as a positive initiative to engage others. But I still feel very aggrieved that as an opposition councillor, I am substantially excluded, and I welcome the invitation to members to attend the boards. But I did look at the application to go on the boards and find it very strange that I am one of 70 of us, or not 70 of us, 46 of us, specifically precluded from having anything to do with serving on those boards. And that I feel very uncomfortable with. So I'm interested to hear about a governance review, and I'm interested in who's commissioned the governance review. Is that a partnership commission, or is it the City Council who has commissioned it on behalf of the One City office?
So I would say it's the City office review of its governance. So does the council want to continue to be putting money into it? No. Does the council want does it want to be sort of linked to the mayor in some way? No. So it's, ultimately it's for the benefit of the city, this institution. That's what it's there for. And ultimately it needs to be funded by the city and operated by the city rather than the City Council. So the view is, the City office needs to find a way to make itself part of Bristol. It's not part of the Bristol City Council.
I'm really picking up on Heather's comment that if there is a governance review, which by the sound of it we're paying at least half of, it wouldn't be unreasonable for scrutiny members to have the opportunity to scrutinise that governance review, or the audit committee to have a chance to scrutinise that governance review. So I'm throwing out that challenge, and I think I'd have the support of all members if I also said the offer that we would like to be involved in a constructive way remains, and I'd fully support the Mayor and the Executive not including people who were not constructive in the process or destructive. I have no problem with that, but I think the exclusion of opposition councillors isn't appropriate in something that is trying to be one city, because it's actually one city excluding opposition councillors. So there are two veins there. One is the inclusion of opposition members, and the other is accountability for a governance review, which the council is paying for. Immaterial in the scope of the budget that we're talking about today, but actually very significant in terms of the direction of the city and the role of one city. So Craig and Mike, I'm flagging that up, and I think colleagues will be, those of us who are on OSM will be looking at the opportunity to discuss that, and I hope to engage again in a constructive discussion. It's not looking to interfere and detract from the good work that's going on, but we'd like to play a part and actually understand more so that we can be supportive. Is that a fair summary? Martin?
And that will be happening in March when Andrea comes back to Osm.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I in fact asked if it can be on the agenda at Osm because of the absence of any in-depth scrutiny in the past, and the fact that frequently the documents are described as external. They're by partners. We are part of that process, but they've always been described as external. But they come into the council as things the council is making commitments towards. The council is adopting some of the targets. We have people working on some of those targets, and then in fact sometimes those one city boards change their target because they review them every year, and some drop off and a new one's put in. And they're a list of ideas really and aspirations, and we agree with them. Collaboration and partnership means common ground. So we share that common ground, and then we find they're not a priority of the one city board perhaps the year after, or they've become a council priority because it's in one of the one city documents. But we've always been told, but that's an external organisation, set up. And these things have come into the council. That's why there's been frustration, I think, about not being part of something that we are then signed up to. And that's why I did ask for it to be on that agenda for that meeting. And so I look forward to that, because it is about collaboration. It's about finding common ground and then hopefully expanding it across more and more city organisations to move things in the right direction. But it's always sort of arrived in the council to those of us, not involved. This is something that's come from that process rather than something we're part of.
Heather, and then I'm going to bring this particular item, and Zoe, and then I'm going to bring this to a conclusion.
I think I pretty much echo Martin here, that where our contributions to the one city, that it should still be something that members have an opportunity to scrutinise. And I've seen it crop up more and more often that this is in line with one city, therefore it feels like a decision is made without the opportunity for opposition councillors to scrutinise that. And I think it's very much the similar discussions and decisions that have to be made about Bristol's contributions to WECA projects and how things are scrutinised in terms of decisions made between Bristol and WECA. I think one city is similar, and there's a very, in some ways in terms of our contribution towards it, and there's some very complicated decision making in that.
I mean, I suppose the pushback I would make to that is that Marvin's manifesto was broadly based on the one city plan. So actually we've been elected on those as our commitments. Marvin was elected on that as his commitments, and therefore we have built our corporate strategy and so on in line with the things that were in Marvin's manifesto that also are in the one city plan. So I take your point, but I don't agree.
Zoe.
Not on the one city plan though, yeah. Okay, yeah. So this is related to the question that I put in R19, which was about modernising trade union facility time arrangements. And that in that, as it says, review our arrangements for trade union facility time and put in a new modernised facility agreement, reducing budget from 195 to £50,000. And the remaining budget will be used as a contingency to cover national or regional duties, which are requirements of national collective bargaining agreements. Yeah, so a cut of 145, about 75%. Yeah. So just wanting to check that the remaining 50,000, as it says in that, will be used to cover national or regional duties only. Yeah.
That's the intention, but just to clarify, the expectation is that services and departments would be absorbing the cost of enabling the union activities as agreed through the new modernised facilities agreement. So it's not that there would be a 75% reduction in activity, it's that it will be funded via services and departments making provision for the appropriate staff to participate in that activity.
Okay, yeah, thanks, yeah. So, but in the response to my question about it, it was put, once the budget for trade union facility time has been approved, we will produce a draft facilities time agreement for consultation based on the amount approved in the budget. But the amount remaining in the budget is £50,000 to be used for regional and national time only. Therefore, there will be no money in the budget for local facility time. Therefore, how can we have a facilities time based on a zero budget?
So the intention is that there won't be a separate corporate budget, but services, as I said, services and departments would need to facilitate the participation of trade union representatives in line with the agreement, the new agreement.
But there will be no budget for it.
But services and departments will need to absorb the cost of enabling staff to participate in line with the new. So it won't need a separate corporate budget. That's the issue. So,
but that answer is slightly misleading then. If there is no budget, if each department's got to fund time regarding release people for the time, there will be no budget for them to be able to work against. They'll just have to absorb it, like you say.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think the answer is very well worded.
Okay, thanks. And then it also said it will negate the need to have a small number of trade union representatives receiving block release. And there's answers in this and elsewhere about being able to attend consultation meetings and negotiating meetings. But will any facility time be allowed for union officers to attend non-meetings with non-BCC meetings, for instance, branch officer time, things like that?
Well, all of that would need to be dealt with in reaching a new agreement on facilities time. I mean, it'll all be subject to that new agreement. That needs to be the basis of the consultation, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the answer that's already been given is it will negate the need to have a small number of trade union representatives receiving block release. So, branch officers, they're not just in consultation meetings or negotiation meetings. They also need to meet as branches to, support stewards, look at branch finances, supervise staff, run committee meetings, organise to build union density and things like that. So it's not just about direct meetings with BCC corporate, is it? So, and they need to attend training and have things like that. So that needs officers that do have the small number of officers or a larger number of officers to have time for block release, not scattered across the union thing. So it seems like the decision's already been made about what that facility time arrangements will be, and it will not allow union branch officials to act as union branch officials.
So the status quo will remain in place until a new facilities agreement is reached? There's no more to say at the moment.
And yet the answer's already there, so... Yeah.
Councillor Cheney says, I suspect the answer's not articulated very effectively, but so the position is the status quo will remain until a new facilities agreement is reached.
But it looks like the aim is to negate the need to have a small, to have trade union representatives on block release. And because part of my question was asking about the goal, and that appears to be the goal then?
No, I don't. I'm not sure who wrote this response, but this is not what we've discussed, and this is not our expectation. So,
right, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Tim, did I miss you out just now, or did I come to you? I can't remember.
No, I didn't. I didn't indicate.
No, okay.
I was just going to ask a follow-up on that, though.
Yep, please.
Do we see that as putting more pressure on departmental budgets, where and managers to authorise release of staff if it's suddenly coming out of their budget rather than out of a corporate budget? Is that not going to cause more tension within a department where their budgets are already really strapped?
So we are assuming that services will need to absorb making facilities time available, and we'll need to work with managers to make sure that that's done in a way that they can accommodate. The fact is the council's got a £19 million budget gap. We need to continue to support trade union activity. This is a way of doing that. So yes, there'll be some pressure on services, but that's the basis of the proposal, that the costs are absorbed across the council rather than have a dedicated corporate budget of the previous scale, subject to the agreement of the new facilities agreement.
Okay, I think we've come to the end on resources. So
Councillor Goll, can I just offer a point of clarity, Chair, just in terms of, I think, the question that I think it was Councillor Wilcox asked. I think we were answering the wrong question. So I think you were referring to R9, which is around legal services and the level of recurrent additional funding in terms of income generation, as opposed to the statutory.
No, it's definitely our let me bring it up. Where's it gone? R9, review of chargeable services and income. Definitely that one I was referring to.
And I understand that to be legal services and some specific charges. So it's about the recurrent charges that they believe that they have, that they can sustain going forward. So yes, there is an analysis that they have done in terms of where they do charge, etc., and where they believe that will be recurrent, which is slightly different to the strategic review of fees and charges that I spoke about. But we can ask them to confirm that to you.
But it would be good to put that in the explanation, because it's not there at the moment.
Right. Okay, so we move on, and the final section we identified was issues of savings, which was both the current year's savings and their expected delivery, and the budget year's savings. Now, I think we've covered many of those anyway in our questions, but I just want to check with members whether there is anything else that you wish to ask. David?
So at last week's meeting, we raised several questions. What's the timescales for getting those questions answered, please?
I will try and get them. I'm trying to get them as soon as I can. Try and get them to you by the end. Well, I'll try by the end of the week. Some of them might take longer than others, but we will endeavour to get them to you as soon as possible.
As long as it's before the actual budget, that would be good. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just add, Joe, we do need to get them by the end of the week, because otherwise it isn't going to be in time for members to make sense of them and prepare for the council meeting. So we'll make sure you get answers by the end of the week.
Thank you.
Okay. So the only bit that I would like to share with members is just talking through the format of comments we make to full council. Officers and cabinet members are very welcome to stay for that, but don't feel you have to. And just in case you feel you're going to leave, can I just thank officers again for your time and contribution, and Cabinet members. We've had a really positive turnout, and that is appreciated. And hopefully we can carry on those engagements. We won't always agree, but we can at least do it in a positive way. So thank you all for your time. Members, it's just a question really of how we play this. What I was proposing was that when Joe and Dan have produced the notes of today's meeting, that we will circulate those. And if you're happy with those, then it seems to me the best way of conveying to full council the areas that we've covered is for them to actually see the notes of what we've done, and possibly with some notes from the task group on both the medium term and the budget as well. But I just wanted to see whether there were issues that members felt were of such significance that I should mention, and I ask that because it seems to me this is the resources statement on the budget is not a party political statement. It's one that's representing all members of Scrutiny, so therefore it can't be as partisan as our individual speeches might be at other stages. But it's a question of other issues that we feel we have some common ground on. From today, I noted down, I felt there was fairly common agreement on one city. I think there's fairly common agreement on a concern about the trade union time and how I'm all for looking at managing all our costs in every way, but I also recognise the importance of how that is worked. So I was envisaging that diplomatic comments on those two might be appropriate if members felt that was reasonable. Zoe?
Yeah, I'd have thought schools and the high need grant will need to be part of that, given that it's such a huge amount and so difficult for us to handle, and we seem to be constrained by central government and how we can handle it, and yet we have a statutory need to provide EHCPs, so it just feels like you can't square the circle, and I think we need to flag that up.
Yep. Tim?
I'd just like us to make an overall point about the fact that this is a huge amount of money that we're having to save this year at fairly short notice, and therefore my feeling is that, you know, this is a budget that you can't be 100% confident in until a lot of reviews have been done and we start to see.
It's a huge saving on top of many years of huge savings as well.
Absolutely, you know, everybody's done a fantastic job of identifying potential savings, but that is a big risk because a lot of those have to be consulted on, and there are quite a few things that we're not going to know until quite a long time further down the line whether we can realise those savings.
It is, although Denise is gone. Mike, am I right in thinking though that those risks have been assessed and measured so that the bigger the risk, the lower the amount of the potential saving is brought in? So compared to what's happened in past years where on some occasions optimistic savings have been brought in and hoped for, I think, am I right, there's more...
That's right, Chair. So there's a RAG rating of all the savings proposals, red, amber, green. Green savings, it's been assumed 100% of the saving will be delivered. Amber, I think it's 80%, and red rated risks are 60%. So averaging over the whole of the budget proposals, we think that you know, we've got enough to close the gap. But if you look at the figures, I think the savings proposal actually amount to well over 20 million, whereas the target's 19. So we are assuming that there'll be some attrition from those savings as a result of further consultation, the challenge from members, refinements that come through the EQIA process. But you're right that because of that, you know, significant risk in there, we're anticipating that not all of them will land. But the advice we're giving to members is to progress them at this stage, subject to those further refinements.
Yeah, and there's by no means meant as a criticism. I think finding all of these savings has been an incredible job, but being put in that situation where you have to find that amount of savings at short notice definitely must come with a risk to the authority.
And can I just ask members as well, is there a shared concern, which I know Mike and the team are aware of, but is there a shared concern about the staff reductions on top of the existing reductions and the management pressure? And therefore, is it worth putting in a comment along those lines as well?
Yeah, I would say so. And a risk of losing quality out of the authority in terms of staff.
Okay, Martin, Zoe, David.
Well, just on that latter point, I mean, the fact that vacant posts is being targeted means that there's a restructuring without an overview of the structure. It's saying, let's find those vacancies, which I don't know if there's one long list of them all, but there are these sort of X number of vacancies across the whole authority, and about 1 in 5 will now be deleted following some process of assessing which will have more impact, presumably, or which team can absorb them, presumably. But that puts pressure on all the existing staff who are already there. The workload won't necessarily go away, put it that way. There could be more staff absences because of things like that. So it's a very unfortunate way of trying to delete a series of posts across the council by just saying we'll find which are vacant and then 1 in 5 of them. But also, if we look at the list of savings, the majority are ones where consultation is required. So in terms of financial savings, most of them, and it was revealed in the last meeting, it's as if they haven't really been thought through. They've come up in the last couple of months from one of the questions I asked last time. We don't quite know how it works at the moment, or we're going to find a different way to make it work, or we're going to find different ways to fund this or charge this or work with others to deliver this. So that there is so much uncertainty that at the end of that consultation, which could affect an awful lot of people in the city who feel they want to input into that. So we don't know what process there'll be for all of those consultations and who will be involved in more than one consultation, and they'll feel a lot of services they depend on might be affected. And at the end of it, we don't know quite what will happen to the budget, because there's this sort of over kind of scoping beyond where we have to, because it's going to pull in, but we don't know quite how it will pull in, and what will and won't be saved. So it's a worrying time. It's not of our making. It's how we have to respond to the ever shrinking funding. But it's quite disturbing having to discuss these and then find they haven't really all been, the details aren't all there yet.
David.
So I think we need to raise comments about the accessibility of this budget and the way it's been presented. We've looked at certain sections. We give particular examples of savings numbers, such as R09, and the officers don't necessarily know what we're talking about because they're not explained properly in the budget. So I would really like to emphasise the fact that the way that the budget is presented to both members and the electorate, because they've got to understand it as well, needs to be changed.
Mike, that comment from David, I think just to share with you, is something that informally members have discussed in the context that the way we are meant to produce budget amendments is actually helped to highlight to all of us that we didn't have as much information as we needed to piece together an amendment which we would have felt comfortable with. So I don't know how that can be squared, but it's really just a plea of could we actually have some discussions post this process to talk about what we feel could help that process to see whether it's doable, because it was very strange in one of the informal discussions we had where a casual comment that was mentioned suddenly found that actually everyone was sharing the same concern, and it's about the accountability and the transparency, and also how the public can be aware of the information that we're being asked to know and understand in detail.
If I could respond to some of that, Chair. So the first thing to say is, I mean, every year we should, take stock and learn lessons about things we can do better. So I completely accept the general point. But just to pick up a couple of specific points that have been made, it's very difficult for us to field the relevant officers who can respond to questions that you raise in a session like this on a specific budget line. It wouldn't be a sensible use of resources for us to bring down the 20 or 30 people that we need to do that. So when we get advance notice of questions, obviously it's much easier for us to do that. So I think this does cut both ways. Some advance notice of the areas that you want to question would undoubtedly help. I guess the other point to make, and hopefully some members have made it, the whole process did begin relatively late this year because we only became aware of the size of the budget gap much later than we would normally do, which would normally happen as part of the end of year close down. This position really only crystallised around August, September time. And so, we have had to pull this together relatively late in the day. So it's not been ideal, and I'd acknowledge that. So I accept it's been a difficult year for everyone, including members, to scrutinise the budget.
And whilst I always love a political opportunity, I also recognise that in the circumstances with COVID and with everything else, that actually the problem couldn't have been crystallised sooner, and we have to be realistic in that. Martin, then Heather.
So it was just I was trying to see if it was in those notes from the first meeting or whether it was one of our scrutiny groups, because the need for cross-referencing through the document is something I flagged up last time, I think. Because you find the same point appears in different bits of the documentation, different appendices, different lists, and we're trying to join up, which equalities impact assessment related to which bit of revenue, which related to which directorate, and then you need to sometimes have this other information about the structure, the staffing, the size of that department, what its budget looks like already, which we don't necessarily have to hand to then understand the implication of that. So, yes, of course, more time and effort would help. I'm sure. I appreciate that. But if it could be built up in a way that was as well cross-referenced as possible with as many bits of background information, it would help enormously. So it's a lesson for next time.
Heather, then Zoe, then Mark, I think I've got at the moment. Oh, and John. Sorry, John.
I mean, I have to ask that in future years, I guess, that we get to see the budget. We've had a lot of narrative on the different aspects and the changes to the budget. But we don't actually have the information. And I know that the line-by-line budget and the information on all the different parts of all the different teams' budgets would be a hell of a lot of information. I understand that very few councillors and very few members of the public would go through that. But for us to both scrutinise, but also as potentially opposition councillors to be able to make amendments and changes to the budget, it is very difficult when, at the moment, we don't truly know what the budget is, other than generally it's 5 lines within each directorate.
Zoe?
Yeah, two things really. One was I just wanted to clarify, in fact, in relation to what Martin said about deletion of vacant posts, because I understood it was all vacant posts would be deleted unless they were decided that we really can't do. Is it a fifth? Because I hadn't picked that up then.
So the intention is to seek to delete 20% of vacant posts, so 20% of those posts that are vacant. We'll be talking to managers about some criteria to how to focus those. But to Martin's point, the intention is clearly to focus retaining capacity in those areas that are closest to council priorities. So, vacant social care posts are not going to be deleted, clearly. So we'll take a informed view about where we can delete. So hence 20% should enable us to prioritise the most important posts within the council.
Thanks. And then the other thing is about, sort of looking at the risk of not delivering some of the items, because you said we've got sounded like low 20s is what it all adds up to. But there's quite a few where, you know, the chance of getting the entire saving within the next financial year might be 75%, might be 50%. But are we doing those sort of, you know, it's a 50% chance of delivering, therefore it's 50% of that we can count on? Because there's quite a few where they're down for a saving in the next financial year, and I think it's going to be really tight. And from the answers, you know, because you've got to go to consultation and then procurement and then, you know, actually do the thing or do the sale or whatever, there's a lot where it will spill over into the next year, isn't that? And is that fully accounted for, that we want to make the saving this year, we put it in for this year, it might be the year after, but will we still cope? Well, will there suddenly be a massive hole in our finances because we're just not able to deliver those savings within this year?
So behind the RAG ratings that I referred to is an achievability assessment that has come from all of the managers. And one of the reasons why effectively we have sometimes talked about this as being a 2-year budget is because of our relatively late start. We recognise that a number of these savings proposals will only be part year in 22-23, and some of them won't come in until 23-24. So if you look at the budget papers, there's an assumption that we'll be using general reserves in 22-23 to smooth over the fact that quite a lot of the savings don't really kick in until 23-24. I think that I've closed down now, so but I think that is set out in some of the appropriate budget papers. You can see that at work.
Right, yeah, so sometimes they'll be shown as a 22-23 saving, but we don't anticipate we will be able to make that entire saving because we'll have to backfill with reserve as needed then.
Well,
to smooth us over, like you say.
It's both. So some of the savings are not assumed to come in until 23-24. We won't have incorporated them in 22-23 unless we think there's a reasonable prospect of them being introduced in 22-23. But then we've applied that RAG rating, accepting that for some of them there's a risk that they won't be fully implemented in 22-23. And we've tried to accommodate that, as I say, by taking an overall view of the budget as well as the specific savings proposals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it makes it clearer than when you think, really? We really think it's going to be delivered then? That there may be some slippage, but we'll cope with that. Yeah, rather than going, well, let's stick a quarter into the next year because we're not quite sure where it's going to be. Yeah.
I mean, sorry, just specific. It depends on the specific savings proposal. So some of them we're relatively clearer and more confident and have a delivery plan, so we can make assumptions about a part year effect. In other cases, it's a risk of non-delivery and therefore it's been reduced accordingly.
Mark?
So I would concur with the comments about paperwork. It's been very difficult to follow the threads of this without having to juggle between the different documents and to work out where the cross referencing should be. And I know it's always a working process, having been involved with budgets for some time, but I think it should be improved. It should be capable of being improved. I do worry about the capacity of this place. There's obviously a human consequence to reducing numbers of staff, but the work that we do is increasingly complex with more partners and requires new skill sets. And I'd like to think that we're going to invest in those, and I see some of that in the capacity work, and which is in the budget, but I think it's going to be an even important part of what we do going forward. I would like the budget and our comments on the budget to adopt more of a thematic approach, and I would like to see more emphasis on recovery from the pandemic, particularly the economic recovery, but also the social one, because a lot of what we've discussed does relate to the impact of the pandemic. It has dislocated operations here, but it's had a tremendous effect on the city and the people of the city. So I'd like to see more of a thematic approach in both our comments and in the budget itself. And obviously the scale of the gap and the scale of the savings is not where we wish to be. We have been here in the past and we've worked through it, but each time you face this, there's less and less to actually cut back, and it is having a material effect on the council and the council's ability to do its job.
Thank you, Mark. John?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm not sure if adult social care was on your list, because obviously, whilst we welcome all the new ways of working and the transformation exercise, I don't think adult social care's met its budget, or rather has overshot its budget for as many years as I've been here. So I suspect meeting that budget is going to be very stretching and very demanding, and it must be a major risk.
Okay, thank you, John. Tim and then Mark.
I just wanted to ask Mike really about the risk that is also involved in the fact that we've got money coming down the line for major infrastructure projects from WECA, and we know that WECA's had a large settlement, this year, but at the same time we're in a process of cutting back on our staff because of our revenue, our problems with our revenue budget. So is it going to be a risk to being able to do those sort of major projects that we've bid for the money from WECA for? Because I imagine that we can't spend any of that money on people to do that work.
So you can actually. So if you've got an identified capital project that has capital funding, the staff costs associated with delivering it are capitalised. So that specifically isn't a problem. The difficulty comes at the stage before you've got an identified capital project, where you're doing the feasibility work and you're not quite sure what it is that you want to do. That's a revenue cost, and that's where we struggle. It's developing the strategies and propositions in the first place. That's the challenge. But where we get funding from WECA or from anywhere else that comes with a capital budget, you can capitalise the staff costs, so that's not such a challenge. Finding the staff is actually the bigger challenge. Attracting suitably, qualified staff at a wage we can afford is more of a challenge.
So I just think that could be added as a risk to our, what we're aiming to do going forward is the fact that we are severely short-staffed as an authority in terms of the skills to take on the projects that we're hoping we'll get money for.
Yeah. Okay. Just as we're going through that, what I noticed we focused on mostly the things we talked about today. So it did seem to me capital programme and delivery, and we know the capital strategy is designed to deliver, but we also know that the problem of delivering the capital spend has always been a challenge. So I think it's worth commenting on that. I also think there were comments on reserves, and that we might want to comment a little bit further there, and that in part links into the DSG issue and whether the reserves need to cover that deficit or not. So that was another issue that we picked up. Now, having gone through this and got a fairly comprehensive list, what I'm inclined to try and do is see if I can draft something that I will circulate to those who've been at this and the first half of this meeting, for comment, for suggestion, for anything that can be rewritten, retweaked, or whatever. What I will do, however, is it'll be a first draft, and it won't be tidied. It'll be simply sent round to see whether people are inclined to agree on balance with it. And if you are, then Joe and I will work on trying to put it into a better format to go to full council. It won't be ready for the distribution of the full council papers, I'm guessing, because I think they go out. When do they go out? They go out fairly soon, don't they? Yeah. So we're no way would it be ready for that, but they can be put as a supplementary dispatch. So it's possible that our notes may be able to go with the papers in terms of the things we've discussed, but the sort of summary report of the issues that we've raised and we've had general cross-party agreement on will take a little bit longer, but as I say, I'll start a draft and see how I get on, if that works for you. Tim?
I was just going to say one other thing in terms of drafting. I'd like it recognised, the sort of quality of the work that's gone into the HRA side of the budget, because I think everybody here probably recognises that. And it was your comment about focusing on this week that suddenly made me think, last week we talked about that.
Thank you for that. And I think the other thing I would say, because we've talked about the presentation and the way we can engage, but I'm very keen, Mike, that you and the finance team don't take that as a criticism of the engagement that we've had. But that's perhaps our frustration, that we've had some really positive engagement and really useful sharing of information all the way through the process. But for us, as laymen, to master the final budget has proved very challenging. And so it's a frustration with the process, but a recognition that the finance team have actually been very committed, very open, and therefore I wouldn't want any of our comments to be taken as a criticism of them.
No, there won't be, Chairman. And I think, the first thing I said was it's right that every year, we take stock and learn lessons and see what we can do to improve things next year. And I'm sure Denise and the team would take it in that spirit too, Chair.
Members, unless there is anything else. Oh, Zoe, yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering on that. Is there any way that in the future, rather than having, it all goes to, cabinet in all the different reports, different sections, things like that, that we could have a sort of, like when you do the consultation, a website that does put it all together with link, this is the main budget, this is adult social care, this is that, these are the proposals linked to that. So it'd be so much easier, wouldn't it, if it was formatted like a website that you could do a click through on it? I know it would take time and effort, but
I was going to say I would love to think that, but one can't help having been on the other side and knowing the pressures of producing a budget for whatever deadline it is. One's also got to be realistic on what one can possibly expect, because the emphasis has to go on balancing the figures and the presentation bit there isn't then time for. So I agree with what you say, but I think that's why we'd have to work with officers to try and talk through what would work for us and what would work for them, because one doesn't have the luxury of having the ideal answer. Is that fair, Mike?
I don't think it does any harm to set out ideally, what you'd like to be able to do, and then we can work backwards from how much of that we can actually achieve. I'm with Jeff in practice delivering that. I struggle to see how we could do it, but there's no harm setting out, ideally what you'd like to be able to do, and then we can see how far towards that we can get.
Heather, and then I am going to.
Yeah, just a practical point on. Just having more headings that are indexed within the budget, because last meeting people were asking me if I could pinpoint which page things were on. Because the whole budget document doesn't have headings that you can, within Modern Gov that you can then flick that are indexed. Very simple thing. My 16 pages of Green Party budget notes has more headings that you can index between than the actual budget document. Which Martin has very much appreciated, I'm sure.
Right, thank you, Heather. Right, I am going to bring this to a close. I just want to say, though, Mike, thank you for seeing us through the whole of this. That's very much appreciated, and for your contributions. Can I thank Joe, Dan, and Tom for their work, and indeed their work's only just beginning because they've got to make sense of all these notes afterwards. But most of all, can I just thank all of you, because this budget scrutiny process is always a challenge, and I must say it's reassuring when one can feel there's been a really positive engagement. We've managed to ask a significant amount of questions, and but asked in a way that hasn't been doing anything other than to help our understanding of the process, and respectful of the officers who've done that. And it's actually, I think, really positive. You all know my preference is at scrutiny meetings where one can't actually identify the party of the person making the comment, and I think it's really important that we've made that happen this time, and it's really just been constructive engagement. So from me, can I just say a really big thank you for actually making this work in as positive a way as it can. So I declare this meeting closed.